What is the history of the Pyramids of Giza? Welcome to Collapse, where history comes to life and each video immerses you in the fate of those who shaped the world. Today, let's trace back to some of humanity's most famous monuments, the Pyramids of Giza. Erected more than 4 millennia ago, they dominate the desert like stone sentinels, silent guardians of the pharaoh's glory. In their shadow lie Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, rulers who sought to defy death and engrave their reign in eternity. But behind their unwavering majesty, a question remains. What do the Pyramids of Giza really tell us? Are they merely a testament to the power of kings and the ingenuity of builders? Or are they the echo of a deeper quest, that of an entire people seeking to unlock the secret of immortality? But before embarking on a new adventure, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. Thank you, and have a great journey. Between 2700 and 2600. Before Christ, the ancient world found itself at a pivotal moment, marked by the affirmation of centralized kingdoms and the flourishing of major techniques. Egypt of the Old Kingdom, specifically under the 4th dynasty, was about to erect the Great Pyramid of Khufu, an emblematic monument of the early Bronze Age. While the early Egyptian dynasties consolidated their power, other civilizations shone simultaneously, whether it be the city-states of Sumer or the strong entities taking shape along the Indus River. Megalithic Europe, pre-Palatial Aegean world, urban Anatolia, early Andes, and late Neolithic China completed this bustling tableau, each following its own trajectory. Let us first approach the exact time and place where the Pyramid of Khufu was being prepared. We are in the Egyptian Old Kingdom, a period that extends approximately from 2700 to 2200 before Christi. The 4th dynasty, at the heart of this interval, embodies the peak of pharaonic power. Egypt, already unified for centuries, is ruled by a sovereign who considers himself the son of the gods. His power rests on the fertility of the Nile, a nourishing river whose floods dictate agricultural life and structure the economy. At this time, hieroglyphic writing is already used for cataloging wealth and the symbolic assertion of royal authority. Beyond Egypt's borders, Mesopotamia is divided into competing city-states: Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Kish, and many others. Sumer, still politically fragmented, nevertheless develops an intense urban life, supported by major irrigation canals, where cuneiform records, grain transactions, and barley production. Akkad, to the north, is slowly gearing up for the unification of the region under a single ruler. To the east, the Indus Valley is initiating the so-called early Harappan phase, where planned settlements and sophisticated construction techniques, particularly in standardized brick manufacture, emerge. Trade networks already connect these distant areas, as Afghan lapis lazuli or Baluchi copper find their way to Mesopotamia. In Anatolia, fortified urban centers develop, with specialized crafts in copper and bronze metallurgy. In Syria-Palestine, small cities arise near trade corridors, benefiting from cedar wood expansion and other precious resources. The Aegean regions, meanwhile, begin their pre-palatial trajectory. In Crete, for instance, coastal villages focused on fishing and maritime exchange emerge. In Europe, megalithism remains vibrant, evidenced by stone alignments or collective burial chambers. Across the globe, the Andean region sees the emergence of sites like Cairo Soup, one of the oldest urban complexes on the Pacific coast. Finally, China, still in its late Neolithic period, gradually forges ceramic traditions and develops rammed earth fortifications, heralding a proto-state age. In this cultural mosaic, the economy is based on irrigated agriculture, which involves the construction of canals, levees, and retention basins. The Nile in Egypt, the Tigris and Euphrates in Mesopotamia, the Indus in South Asia, all guarantee abundant and regular harvests, ensuring the population with a minimum of food security. The domestication and use of draft animals facilitate the transportation of goods, while specialized craftsmanship covers both copper metallurgy and the production of pottery or linen textiles. Exchange networks extend, linking Sinai for copper, Afghanistan for lapis lazuli, and the Levant for its precious construction wood. Environmentally, the climate of the recent Holocene remains relatively favorable, although local variations may affect certain regions. In Egypt, the Nile flood serves as a calendar. Each year, the inundation deposits fertile silt that stimulates the next farming season. This natural regularity contributes to the prominence of a ruling elite capable of mobilizing resources to build levees and canals. It is different in more arid lands, where the scarcity of rainfall forces communities to multiply hydraulic arrangements. However, on the whole, conditions remain conducive to the expansion of cultures and the rise of major architectural projects. Politically, the era is characterized by the consolidation of sacred kingdoms. In these systems, the king is perceived as an intermediary between the divine sphere and the human domain. This belief promotes administrative centralization and the deployment of a bureaucracy tasked with organizing labor, collecting taxes, and managing the flow of goods. Writing, whether hieroglyphic or cuneiform, is therefore used to record these complex processes while celebrating the supreme authority of the sovereign in commemorative inscriptions. The religious dimension of power is expressed everywhere: Sumerian temples, Egyptian sanctuaries, collective places of worship where the relationship between man and the divine is played out. From then on, techniques and knowledge progress rapidly. Astronomical observations allow for the approximate prediction of solstices and equinoxes, to orient monuments according to certain stars or the heliacal rising of the constellation of Sirius. Practical geometry is expressed in the measurement of fields and in the construction of buildings, especially when stone replaces brick. Monumental construction sites mobilize engineers and craftsmen. This is the case in Egypt, where knotted ropes, plumb lines, and access ramps are used to move immense blocks of limestone or granite. River and coastal navigation allow for the transport of wood, metals, and other goods over long distances, sometimes connecting very distant peoples. But Egypt has a noticeable singularity. Its territory is a fertile corridor, dominated by the cycle of the Nile floods and flanked on either side by deserts. This geographical situation limits massive invasions and ensures a certain dynastic stability. Moreover, solar ideology emerges very early. The pharaoh is said to be the son of Re, embodying cosmic order on Earth. In this logic, the construction of permanent stone asserts the permanence of the state and the eternal cycle of the sun. Resources are thus concentrated to create monumental edifices that will immortalize the royal figure. The continuity of dynasties, already solid from earlier periods, allows the Old Kingdom to develop an unprecedented architectural program. Understanding Ma'at is essential to grasp the Egyptian worldview. This concept unites cosmic order, justice, and the balance between opposing forces. The pharaoh, as the guarantor of Ma'at, ensures that chaos does not prevail by maintaining the prosperity and cohesion of the kingdom. Thus, the royal function is akin to a bridge between men and the gods. This status is reflected in religious ceremonies, in economic management, and of course, in tomb construction. For the king, the tomb is not a mere resting place. It constitutes the house of eternity, a sacred space where the deceased symbolically rebirths alongside the gods. In this context, erecting a pyramid amounts to building a cosmic staircase, allowing the deified sovereign's ascent. To illustrate this principle, it can be emphasized that the pyramid becomes, at this time, the ultimate symbol of royal transcendence. Egypt had already experimented with mud brick funerary structures, but the use of stone reflects a desire to inscribe the pharaoh's memory in an imperishable stone. The idea of a pyramidal shape gradually builds as a means to help the king's soul ascend to the sky, thereby getting closer to Re, the sun god. The principle of ascension, reinforced by astronomical alignment, aligns with the notion of Mejate. By constructing these grand edifices, the royal court asserts that the universe is under divine benevolence. Every architectural detail, every block precisely positioned, contributes to this vast spiritual program where the king's tomb becomes a pivot between the world of the living and that of the gods. In this cultural context, the Great Pyramid of Khufu is no longer simply a technical challenge. It expresses the synthesis of the order desired by the entire community, convinced that maintaining prosperity lies in a constantly maintained balance between earth and sky, a fundamental link. Before the construction of the Pyramids of Giza, Egypt went through several determining phases in the development of its funerary monuments. During the pre-dynastic period, which extends before the unification of the country, around 3150 before Christ, royal tombs remained modest, often consisting of pits topped with a simple tumulus. The elites then begin to distinguish themselves with slightly more elaborate burials, indicating an emerging hierarchy and an increasingly developed awareness of life in the afterlife. These funerary initiatives increase. Towards the end of the pre-dynastic period, Abydos in Upper Egypt and Saqqara in Lower Egypt begin to host more complex tombs, foreshadowing the future grandeur of funerary sites. The first forms of mastabas then appear, consisting of rectangular mud brick structures with a shaft leading to the burial chamber. At the same time, the growing prosperity of irrigated agriculture supports the formation of a more stable royal court, laying the ground for the emergence of the first unified dynasties. This era marks evolution. The first and second dynasties, around 3050 before Christ, see the normalization of these mastaba tombs, used by kings and their entourage. Abydos remains an important center where funeral enclosures are erected, while Saqqara continues to expand its role with other complexes. The pharaohs of these dynasties consolidate unification and lay the foundations of a centralized administration. Constructions in mud brick, though less durable than stone, testify to a desire to mark royal authority. The advent of the Third Dynasty, around 2686 before Christ, coincides with the reign of Djoser, a key figure who inaugurates a real turning point in funerary architecture. His step pyramid, erected at Saqqara, revolutionizes the use of cut stone and the very concept of the royal tomb. Instead of a single mastaba, several levels are stacked leading down to underground chambers. Djoser wishes to signal the monarchy's power in the eyes of his people, while ensuring a prestigious eternity. Behind this feat looms a name that will mark Egyptian history, Imhotep. Advisor to the king, priest, and physician, he is the visionary architect who designs the first stone structure of the Old Kingdom. Imhotep innovates by erecting porticos, introducing columns imitating reeds, and arranging courtyards to host cult ceremonies. His genius lies in the desire to build in cut stone, giving Djoser's complex unparalleled solidity and grandeur. This stage also marks the transition from the primitive tumulus to the true pyramid. By superimposing mastabas of decreasing sizes, the step pyramid illustrates the progressive ascent of the king towards celestial realms. In the Egyptian mind, each level brings the deceased a little closer to Re, the sun god. This religious articulation legitimizes the colossal investment in manpower and materials. We see the organization of a builder state, concerned with efficiently organizing collective labor. In this context, the use of seasonal labor becomes systematic. When the lands are flooded by the Nile's inundation, peasants, freed from their agricultural work, gather under the direction of scribes and foremen to quarry, transport, and shape stone. Specialized workshops, notably in copper and textiles, emerge to support the construction effort. The administration takes shape, with a hierarchy dedicated to accounting for resources and overseeing construction sites. After the reign of Djoser, other rulers of the Third Dynasty continue projects at Sekra and further experiment with the pyramid form. At Meidum, a structure is observed that is attributed sometimes to Huni, the last king of the Third Dynasty, sometimes to Sneferu, his successor. This partially collapsed pyramid demonstrates technical experimentation aimed at consolidating the structure. The Egyptians strive to master the ideal angle to avoid breaks, while maintaining a monumental character capable of celebrating royal glory. This research fully comes to fruition under Sneferu, the first pharaoh of the Fourth Dynasty, around 26 and 13 before Christ. He undertakes the construction of two pyramids at Dashur, south of Saqqara. The first, called the Bent Pyramid, changes angle during its elevation, probably due to instability. The second, known as the Red Pyramid, features more uniform faces. Sneferu establishes himself as an innovator, refining the techniques of cutting, transport, and placement that anticipate later achievements. The technical lessons learned under Sneferu are crucial. The angle is determined to be around 43 degrees to ensure stability and a slender appearance. Builders establish a clear distinction between the core of the pyramid, made of less precisely cut blocks, and its casing, composed of higher quality stones. Special care is taken with alignment, controlled by precise measurements. Through these innovations, Egypt succeeds in crafting structures capable of withstanding the centuries and embodying the pharaoh's power. Beyond purely technical considerations, this evolution carries a deep religious significance. By crafting a smooth-sided pyramid, the sovereigns developed the idea of a direct connection with the sun, incarnation of Ra. The roofing and slopes symbolize a light ray leading the royal soul to the solar boat. The Heliopolitan cult intensifies, further linking the throne to divinity. Through these transformations, the pharaoh's authority gains an almost cosmic and powerful dimension. In the wake of this, solar temples adjoining these pyramids embody the cult of Ra. The ceremonies consist of offering libations and chanting sacred hymns, confirming the king's divine affiliation. Obelisks, symbols of a solar ray, are sometimes erected to reinforce this link. Through this spiritual approach, the pyramid is no longer just a royal tomb, but a theological machine enabling the transformation of the sovereign into a celestial entity, maintained in cosmic order by Mayhat. Concurrently, the notion of the royal function becomes clearer. The pharaoh embodies not only the political leader, but also the guarantor of Ma'at. His mission is to preserve universal balance through acts of justice, offerings to the gods, and sacred constructions. Stone edifices become the material translation of this mandate, while the royal titles reflect his spiritual kinship with the gods. Thus, Egypt asserts a model of sacred kingship, centered on cosmic harmony. On the ground, this sacredness is manifested by an expanding administration. Scribes record agricultural production, supervise resource redistribution, and control the workforce. Royal workshops, located near limestone or granite quarries, continually improve their techniques. Each pyramid construction site becomes a collective enterprise, with artisans, quarry workers, and temporary laborers collaborating under the authority of foremen. This effort perpetuates the idea that the entire kingdom serves the deceased pharaoh. In this framework, Saqqara remains a hub of innovation, but Dashur gains prestige under Sneferu. The Pyramids of Meidum, sometimes attributed to the transition between the 3rd and 4th dynasties, testify to the distance covered. Although in ruins today, the pyramid at Meidum served as a laboratory to test different angles and ensure the solidity of the base. Experience accumulates and a profile is achieved, that of the smooth-sided pyramids that will become the standard. Through these monuments, the Egyptians prefigure the principle that will reach its pinnacle at Giza, erecting a structure that combines the funerary function with a solar ideology. The king, son of Re, rises toward the celestial horizon and guarantees the prosperity of the Nile Valley. The construction in stone, costly and complex, is justified by the conviction that the permanence of the pharaoh in the afterlife ensures the order of the world. Henceforth, the state mobilizes its resources to honor this ambition. The prefiguration that will characterize the Old Kingdom is put in place. The pyramid, erected on a base, aligns with the solar axis and marks the ascent of the deified king. Through this architectural approach, the pharaoh actualizes his fusion with Re and consolidates his divine legitimacy. Rituals multiply around the structure, reinforcing the idea that the tomb is a house of eternity. Thus, Egypt is ready to give birth to the masterpieces of Giza. Around 2700 before Christ, Egypt is already a structured kingdom, ruled from the city of Memphis, the political and administrative capital located not far from the future site of the great necropolis of Giza. In this context, choosing this plateau on the west bank of the Nile is both a practical and ideological decision. The river, revered for its fertile floods, symbolically separates the land of the living to the east from the land of the dead to the west. Thus, building the future Pyramid of Khufu in this area extends a funerary tradition of burying rulers in the west. Moreover, Memphis, the main metropolis, benefits at this time from royal workshops, specialized teams, and administrative means capable of undertaking a project of unprecedented scale. The topography of Giza offers an extremely stable limestone base, ideal for supporting the colossal weight of a pyramid. The bedrock is solid, minimizing the risks of landslides or settling, and the high plateau provides a clearly unobstructed horizon. Additionally, the plateau dominates the surrounding landscape, allowing the builders to achieve complex alignments with the stars, particularly the circumpolar stars and the sun, which hold a central place in Egyptian cosmology. Canals could easily connect the area to the Nile, facilitating the transport of stone blocks from nearby or more distant quarries. This proximity to water proved crucial for supplying the construction site with materials, food, and tools, ensuring smooth logistics at the heart of the Old Kingdom. Beyond the geographical aspect, the religious significance of this selection is essential to understand the intention of King Khufu, also known by his Egyptian name Khufu. According to tradition, certain orientations of the pyramids reflect the desire to align the funerary abode with the cardinal points or the solar paths. This cosmic imperative contributes to the creation of a sacred landscape, where each element, pyramid, temple, causeway, and necropolis of dignitaries is integrated into a coherent ceremonial ensemble. On the plateau, the different buildings are arranged in such a way as to emphasize the divine role of the pharaoh, considered the son of the sun god, Re. Thus, the monumentality of the site is designed to celebrate royal power in the afterlife and serve as a bridge between the human world and the celestial domain. Before starting the building, a first step is to prepare the ground and carefully demarcate the space reserved for the future funerary complex. The Egyptians dug perimeter trenches to define the area, then undertook earthworks to achieve a surface as flat as possible. Various techniques, such as the use of ropes and rudimentary levels, allowed them to correct the irregularities of the limestone ground. Some specialists estimate that an almost perfect platform was put in place, with a deviation of just a few centimeters over the entire length of the foundations. The extreme precision of this leveling, remarkable for the time, demonstrates the importance given to the stability of the structure. Without this nearly perfect base, the tall construction could not have achieved the geometric accuracy desired by the master builders. Khufu, the fourth ruler of the fourth dynasty, inherits a tradition initiated by his predecessors, notably Sneferu, renowned for his 2 pyramids at Dashur. During his reign, the intention to build at Giza materializes through a large-scale architectural program. The main pyramid, dedicated to housing the royal remains, is only one element of a vast dynastic complex. It must be accompanied by funeral temples connected by a causeway, as well as necropolises reserved for high dignitaries. This overall scheme, whose origin perhaps dates back to earlier complexes of Saqqara, receives its new and colossal expression here. The direct successors of Khufu, namely Khafre and Menkaure, continue this enterprise, erecting their own monuments and completing the monumental trio that dominates the Giza skyline to this day. In royal ideology, the notion of horizon occupies a prominent place. Egyptian texts refer to Khufu's pyramid as Akhet Khufu, often translated as Horizon of Khufu, suggesting a vision where the monument embodies the junction point between earth and sky. This official title reflects the cosmic function of the construction, conceived as a place where the sovereign, deified after death, is reborn each day with the sunrise. The spatial organization reflects this belief. The imposing mass of the pyramid, erected on the limestone base, becomes the central axis around which temples and ritual causeways are concentrated. The inscriptions and rituals, now lost or fragmentary, reinforce the idea of a sacred transformation of the king into a celestial being. To realize this ambitious project, the royal administration carefully plans the use of a large workforce. Each year, during the flood season of the Nile, when the fields become flooded and agricultural work halts, contingents of fellahs, in other words, peasants, are requisitioned. Supervised by scribes responsible for accounting and foremen skilled in organization, these seasonal workers join permanent artisans who are more specialized. The state thus assembles vast teams, divided into distinct trades: quarrymen to extract stone, cutters to adjust blocks, handlers for transport, and builders for the final assembly. This system, already tested under previous reigns, ensures the mobilization of thousands of arms throughout the construction period. Parallel to this human organization, logistics play a decisive role in the project's success. The secondary arms of the Nile, or specially dug canals, serve as navigational routes to transport limestone blocks from local quarries or from Tira, located on the eastern bank. The loads then arrive at temporary ports established at the foot of the plateau. There, the stone is stored, as protected as possible from the weather. Foodstuffs, like bread and beer, essential to sustaining the workforce, follow the same river route. Vast workshops are set up nearby to shape copper, spin linen, or produce ropes. Each link in this logistical chain, controlled by the administration, contributes to the continuous progress of the construction. The copper workshops notably produce decisive tools for cutting stones and finishing, while those dedicated to linen provide clothing, sails, and elements of rigging. Workers who handle these raw materials are situated in areas organized by specialty. Some are engaged in brewing beer, others in baking bread, and still others in forging. Scribes, for their part, ensure that every delivery of material, every ration distributed, and every block transported to the site is documented. At the time, hieroglyphic writing and its simplified hieratic form are already in use, and the Egyptian administration relies on these methods to exercise rigorous control, avoiding shortages and waste over the months. The stone extracted nearby on the plateau itself avoids long journeys, but the construction also requires a finer limestone from locations such as Tura. Moreover, works in Aswan granite can be done for the most prestigious parts of the funerary complex, such as the lintels or the covering slabs of the internal chambers. Granaries and warehouses set up at the rear of the construction sites store food and supplies. Every day, convoys transport food and materials to the areas where teams are busy. Foremen, responsible for a group of workers, check on the progress of tasks and report to the architects. Using rough plans and markers directly drawn on the construction sites, they know where to place the next blocks or carve the necessary adjustments. Thanks to this meticulous organization, Khufu manages to launch a project that spans several decades. The plans, the precision of the leveling, the massive influx of resources, and the coordination of teams testify to a fierce determination to erect a monumental solar and funerary edifice. Giza then becomes the material symbol of the pharaoh's power, while affirming the privileged link between the king and the cosmic forces. In the Egypt of the Old Kingdom, in the 3rd millennium before Christ, the construction of stone monuments reaches an unprecedented scale. Nowhere else do you see so many carefully cut blocks being raised to form gigantic volumes. The Great Pyramid, attributed to Pharaoh Khufu around 2600 before Christ, is the most spectacular example of this. To understand how its builders managed to assemble over 2 million blocks, one must first explore the questions of the available materials and the techniques of implementation. The Egyptians, since the early dynasties, have known how to take advantage of limestone, extracting stones with simple copper tools and transporting large cargoes on the Nile. The performance also relies on remarkable logistical skills and work organization in a context where the workforce is subject to extreme heat and the inherent dangers of these colossal construction sites. The local limestone, abundantly present on the Giza Plateau and in the surrounding hills, constitutes the very foundation of the great funerary constructions. Primarily, it serves as the core material for the pyramid, that is to say, the internal part of the edifice, which is not meant to be seen. The blocks that make up the core are often less precisely cut because they are not intended to form a perfectly aligned exterior cladding. Nevertheless, their extraction and placement require sufficient meticulousness to ensure the stability of the whole. In contrast, the fine Tura limestone, extracted from quarries located on the eastern bank of the Nile, several kilometers south of modern-day Cairo, corresponds to the outer cladding. Of a whiter hue and slightly different density, it offers a surface that polishes more easily and reflects more light. When the pyramid is entirely covered with this superior quality limestone, its appearance becomes dazzling under the Egyptian sun. In antiquity, it is sometimes said that these smooth faces, once polished, shone so brightly that they became almost blinding. The Aswan granite, a particularly hard rock, is primarily involved in the strategic parts of the construction where important pressures must be supported. The internal chambers of the pyramid, particularly the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, are made of granite blocks, known for their solidity and resistance to cracking. Heavy granite lintels cap essential passages, and large slabs serve as roofs for certain internal volumes. Supplying granite from Aswan involves navigating the Nile for several hundred kilometers northward, then organizing the unloading of these monoliths, sometimes weighing several tens of tons. Finally, basalt of volcanic origin is used for certain floors, especially in the valley temples or the funerary temples connected to the pyramid. Its dense grain and extreme hardness make it an excellent material for paving, capable of withstanding the repeated trampling of priests and offering bearers. Block extraction remains a fundamental challenge in organizing a monumental construction site. From the outside, the Giza Plateau appears as a vast expanse of solid limestone, but the quarrymen of the Old Kingdom know precisely where to cut the rock to outline large blocks. They first dig trenches around the desired volume, leaving the block partially detached from the substrate. In some quarries, ramps made of earth or rubble are constructed to more easily remove the blocks once freed. Among common extraction techniques, one encounters the use of wet wooden wedges, introduced into pre-existing cracks, or slightly made in the rock with a chisel. As they expand under the effect of moisture, these wedges eventually cause the stone to burst or split, allowing large limestone slabs to be detached. When the rock is harder, the quarrymen then use diorite or dolerite pounders. The rock is struck to create microfractures, patiently repeating the operation at strategic locations. Copper picks and chisels, although less robust than bronze or iron, which were non-existent or rarely used at that time, prove sufficient to tackle the local limestone, which is softer. They require regular sharpening and careful handling, as copper wears quickly against too resistant stone. Nevertheless, the metal workshops located near the site ensure the repair and recasting of these tools, ensuring a continuous rotation. Once extracted, the blocks must be squared, meaning shaped to obtain flat surfaces close to the required dimensions. This preparation can take place directly in the quarry to facilitate transport or at the construction site in specially arranged areas. Again, the quarrymen and stonecutters use picks, copper chisels, stone pounders against stone, and sometimes sand as an abrasive. They make sure to remove asperities, roughly flatten each face, and reduce the final weight to simplify implementation. Systematically, placement marks, often drawn in ochre or ink, indicate the intended position for each block within the course. The Egyptians also use gang marks, a form of inscription revealing the name of the group of workers who prepared or transported the block. These clues, found inside many pyramids or mastabas, serve not only as logistical landmarks, but also as testimony to the pride of the teams looking to distinguish themselves by their contribution to the royal edifice. The Nile constitutes the keystone of logistics. The flood periods, transforming the river into a large navigable corridor, offer the ideal opportunity to move massive cargoes. The Egyptians build solid barges capable of accommodating large blocks and maintaining stability, even with several tons of stone aboard. For this, they use wood imported from the Levant. the current Syrian-Lebanese coast, as Egypt at the time does not have large conifer forests. Once arriving at the construction sites, these barges take artificial canals dug for the occasion or temporary ports installed along the shore or in marshes. Unloading is carried out using wooden ramps or packed earth. As soon as the block is on the bank, it is hoisted onto sleds equipped with runners, which are lubricated with water or moist clay to reduce friction. Teams of dozens of men, sometimes more, pull these sleds with sturdy linen ropes. Egyptian representations, like the famous funerary fresco found at Deir el-Bersha, showing the transport of a colossal statue, illustrate similar processes. A man positioned at the front of the sled regularly pours a liquid ahead of the runners to aid sliding. This technique, seemingly simple, allows enormous blocks to be moved with effort distributed across a large, synchronized team. Once on site, the blocks must still be hoisted several meters, sometimes tens of meters high. This requires constructing ramps, whose precise shape remains sometimes debated among Egyptologists. Some propose a frontal device, running directly along one face of the pyramid, widened at its base to reach a bearable slope. Others suggest the idea of a spiral ramp, encircling the structure and allowing the blocks to be gradually elevated to the top. Other theories suggest internal ramps or mechanisms combined with levers. In any case, the common principle is to create a sufficiently stable inclined plane composed of embankments, raw bricks, or less noble limestone blocks in order to support the weight of each convoy. The inclination must remain reasonable so as not to require excessive traction force and to limit the risk of slipping. Workers, divided into teams, pull in unison on ropes made of vegetable fiber or linen, while others ensure the placement of wooden skids under the load for better control of its advancement. At each level, levers allow for reorienting or slightly lifting the block to correct alignment or avoid an obstacle. This process of traction and lifting, repeated thousands of times, requires flawless organization and an expandable workforce during the flood season, a period of relative agricultural inactivity. To erect the pyramid with extraordinary precision, the builders use a range of measuring and control tools. At the forefront is the knotted rope, calibrated according to the royal cubit, about 52.4 cm, serving as the basis for standard lengths. Scribes and architects regularly check the flatness and straightness using wooden squares, sometimes equipped with a rudimentary plumb line to establish a reliable right angle. The lead hanging from a cord guides the verticality, so important for the orthogonality of the courses. To ensure the horizon, primitive levels and the principle of the gnomon are used, a simple stick planted vertically, whose shadow is measured and compared at various times of the day. The Egyptians were also aware of the path of the stars and knew to rely on certain circumpolar constellations for almost perfect alignments on the cardinal points. The result of this vigilance is manifested in the minimal orientation deviation observed on the base of the Great Pyramid, which varies only by a few minutes of arc from the ideal north-south axis. The tight jointing of the blocks also requires meticulous inspection. The surfaces must fit as closely as possible, limiting space to mortises and tenons, sometimes carved to enhance the overall solidity. A poorly positioned block can weaken the upper courses, necessitate adjustments, and slow down the entire chain of work. That's why foremen continuously patrol the site, checking with their tools the dimensions of each new course. Copper, used for blades, chisels, and saws, remains the most advanced metal available to the artisans of the 4th dynasty. well before the widespread use of bronze. However, it presents a notable limitation. Its malleability causes it to dull and deform quickly on contact with hard rocks. To overcome this issue, sculptors and stonecutters employ mineral abrasives, such as quartz sand, to attack the surface to be cut. Sawing is often carried out by sliding a copper blade on the stone, while generously interposing the sand, which greatly accelerates the cutting. This principle is found in the boring of ducks, where a rotating copper rod, associated with an abrasive, slowly excavates a cylindrical well in the rock. The polishing of the outer facing also relies on the use of abrasives, stone powder, and hard stone tools. Workers rub the surface with water and sand, repeatedly passing over it to remove irregularities. At quarry sites and in specialized workshops, the comings and goings of artisans are incessant. They heat the copper to reshape it or remelt a part of it, make new chisels, produce harder reinforcements, or coat certain blades with a more resistant alloy. All this is done under the supervision of qualified personnel with a solid understanding of the mechanical constraints imposed by the site. The working conditions on a royal site inevitably lead to accidents and injuries. Falling blocks, partial ramp collapses, or careless handling of a pick can cause bruises, fractures, or worse. Archaeological discoveries in Giza reveal the existence of facilities designed to care for injured workers. There are stele motifs depicting care scenes, as well as remnants of rudimentary medical equipment, such as splints made from wood or braided fibers. Ointments based on animal fat, embellished with antiseptic plants, contribute to the disinfection of wounds or the soothing of pain. Feeding workers is a crucial issue to maintain the necessary pulling strength. On the plateau, bakeries and breweries are identified in close proximity to work areas. Bread, beer, and onions form a widespread energy trio. Frescoes from the Old Kingdom often show these foods being distributed in large quantities, sometimes accompanied by legumes and fish from the Nile. The caloric intake must compensate for the intense muscular work required to pull sleds or lift certain elements with levers. The foremen ensure that everyone receives an equitable ration to avoid fatigue or exhaustion that could compromise the smooth operation of the site. These support infrastructures, along with the rotation of teams to limit overwork, indicate that the workforce was not composed of rights-deprived slaves, as was long believed in the collective imagination. On the contrary, archaeological evidence demonstrates a concern for keeping workers healthy, proof of a thoughtful organization. Moreover, some mastabas of dignitaries and craftsmen, located not far from the pyramid, testify to the leader's desire to recognize and honor the contribution of specialized teams. Medical care, minimal rest, and a stable diet thus form the pillars of a site where technique is allied with the human element to build extraordinary monuments. The design of the Great Pyramid of Khufu, erected on the Giza Plateau around the 26th century before Christ, represents a major turning point in the history of monumental architecture. From the initial planning, Khufu's architects aimed for an almost perfect base, both in terms of geometry and orientation. To achieve this, they had to study the sky, using the meticulous observation of circumpolar stars, the ones that never set, and also relying on the sun's course to align each side with the cardinal points. The final result is an extremely low margin of error, still considered one of the greatest technical feats of antiquity today. The near perfection of the base is first explained by prior leveling of the rock, allowing for a stable and flattened surface. To establish this leveling, Egyptian specialists employed rudimentary but effective tools like plumb lines, stretched cords, and a system of water channels that ensured horizontality. Once the surface was prepared, the exact corners were determined using astronomical surveys. By observing the North Star, or referring to two stars near the celestial vault, the team in charge of tracing the axes could pinpoint the north with a margin of error of a few arc minutes. Thus, each side of the pyramid found its place. The structure then rises according to a system of superimposed courses, with the height decreasing as one ascends. This approach aims to distribute the mass evenly and facilitate the placement of blocks, which become smaller on the upper levels. Rough limestone blocks form the core of the construction, while the visible part was originally covered with a finely polished cladding, mainly in fine Tura limestone. Although this cladding has almost disappeared, its adjustment was reputed to be so precise that a knife blade could not fit between two blocks. This particular care reduced erosion and celebrated the geometric perfection sought by the king. Inside, a network of passages and rooms reflects a carefully crafted architectural program to ensure the protection of the royal body as well as its spiritual elevation. The internal arrangement first includes an unfinished underground chamber carved into the rock substrate beneath the pyramid. Its exact use is debated, with some seeing it as a vestige of an initial construction stage, while others propose a symbolic function. Higher up, the so-called Queen's Chamber opens, although its role was not necessarily intended to house a royal spouse's remains. A vast and ingenious grand gallery then runs along the central axis, leading to the king's chamber, culminating at the very heart of the monument. The underground chamber, located well below ground level, was initially intended to continue the tradition of rock-cut tombs. Traces of corridors have been found that extend deeper, indicating the prospect of a potential development abandoned during construction. Archaeologists believe a change of plan occurred when Khufu, or his master builders, opted for a burial chamber located higher up to better symbolize the ascent to the divine sphere. As for the Queen's Chamber, devoid of a sarcophagus, it features a simple layout and a chevron-shaped vault. Its name is conventional. No evidence suggests a queen was buried there, leaving room for several theories about its true purpose. The Great Gallery, approximately 47 meters long and nearly 8.5 meters high, is a technical jewel inside the pyramid. Its ceiling adopts a corbelled design, with each row of stones slightly overhanging the one below, forming a sort of step vault. This configuration not only contributes to the solidity of the structure, but also likely served to facilitate the movement of heavy materials to the king's chamber. Some researchers suggest that a clever system of pulleys or internal ramps was installed there to hoist the granite needed for the lintels and cover slabs. The walls, remarkably smooth, still preserve a few rare graffiti from the era. At the top of this system is the King's Chamber, constructed entirely of red granite from Aswan, a material renowned for its hardness and symbolic value. This rectangular room still houses the sarcophagus, carved from a single block of granite, and features a ceiling made of massive slabs laid horizontally. Above are several relieving chambers stacked to alleviate the pressure on the main vault. Each level of these chambers is composed of carefully arranged blocks, forming an ingenious system that prevents collapse by dispersing the weight of the upper courses. The placement of these enormous blocks required meticulous logistics and unparalleled expertise, showcasing the technical prowess of the Old Kingdom. Additionally, the builders envisioned protective devices to thwart potential intrusions. Among these measures are the famous granite plugs, placed in the corridors leading to the sacred spaces. These massive blocks were lowered or slid into place once the sealing phase was underway, permanently blocking certain passages, making any later access extremely difficult. This was a means of protecting the sarcophagus and offerings while emphasizing the sanctity of the place. Practically, only a system of grooves and slides allowed the exact positioning of each plug. Once in place, these stone locks, hermetically fitted, embodied the idea of an inner fortress, inalterable and guarded against any desecration. Besides these defensive mechanisms, the pyramid is equipped with ducts nicknamed shafts, connecting the king's chamber and the queen's chamber to the outside. Their exact function is debated. To some, they serve to ventilate the internal rooms, ensuring air circulation and preventing excess humidity. Others propose a more symbolic meaning, viewing them as a mystical pathway allowing the sovereign's soul to join the imperishable stars or commune with the celestial gods. The carefully calculated angles of these ducts, as well as their narrowness, suggest they were not intended for purely practical use. They illustrate more the cosmic dimension of the monument, rooted in the funerary ideology of the time. These internal arrangements are part of a larger comprehensive plan, which includes several annexes essential to the funerary cult. To the east of the pyramid was the upper temple, a sanctuary where ceremonies were held to honor the memory of the deceased king. A monumental causeway, covered or open to the sky, depending on interpretations, connected this temple to the lower temple, closer to the valley and the Nile. The latter often served as a reception area for processions, especially when the royal remains or offerings arrived by boat. Around the Great Pyramid, ritual boat pits have been discovered, testifying to the belief in the solar journey. Finally, several satellite pyramids intended for the queens or other funerary purposes completed the sacred enclosure. Around the Great Pyramid stretch, associated necropolises, organized in rows of mastabas and more modest tombs. These sepulchres were reserved for princes, high-ranking officials, and team leaders who had contributed to the construction of the royal work. Each mastaba, having a rectangular plan, generally contained a burial shaft leading to an underground chamber. The walls of the funerary chapels could feature depictions of scenes from daily life or religious acts, reflecting the social rank of the deceased and the rituals essential for their survival in the afterlife. Proximity to the pyramid was sought after, as remaining in the protective shadow of the deceased king encouraged his intercession with the gods. This hierarchical organization of the funerary landscape perfectly illustrates the worksite society, for which the pharaoh embodied both the guarantor of cosmic order and the dispenser of wealth. The workers found their place there until death, thus engraving in stone the memory of their essential contribution to one of the greatest projects in human history. At the heart of the Old Kingdom, Khafre, likely the son or brother of Khufu within the 4th dynasty, erected a pyramid whose peak visibly surpasses that of the Great Pyramid, at least in appearance. In reality, the increased elevation results from a higher rocky substrate, compensating for its slightly smaller dimensions. Remnants of its original casing, primarily made of fine limestone, survive at the top, testifying to the former smooth and dazzling appearance of the royal monuments. Excavations reveal that this edifice is part of a larger funerary complex, associated with the solar deification of the king. Thanks to a well-organized system of ramps and labor, builders fit enormous local limestone blocks, ensuring the stability of the structure. Massive pillars support the rooms of the upper temple, confirming the architectural mastery of the time, marked by the use of copper and hard stone tools, particularly robust. Near this pyramid, the Valley Temple embodies a major passage point where the royal corpse underwent purification and ritual preparations. Built with massive blocks of limestone and granite from Aswan, it features carefully finished walls, once topped by a now missing roof. Basalt floors enhance the solemn aspect, while the arrangement of columns creates an effect of geometric harmony. According to fragmentary inscriptions, this place would have hosted the initial embalming before the long causeway led the funeral procession toward the very pyramid. Lifting techniques then required the use of ramps and sleds, making the movement of cyclopean elements possible. The precision of the assemblies highlights a fine knowledge of angles, polished surfaces, and the handling of hardened copper chisels. The objective remains twofold: to magnify the deceased king and symbolically unite the plateau with the sacred river, the guarantor of life. Not far from this temple, the Great Sphinx emerges from the rock, depicting a lion with a human head, likely modeled after the ruler's features. Carved into a pre-existing limestone bench, it reaches more than 20 meters in height and sports the nemes, a distinctive pharaonic headdress. Egyptologists see it as a symbol of protective strength, placed facing east to greet the sun and affirm sacred sovereignty. Often attributed to Khafre, it could, however, represent another monarch of the 4th dynasty, such as Djedefre, according to some hypotheses. Several ancient and later restorations are observed around the paws and body, indicating continued attachment to this monumental effigy. A contiguous temple, sometimes called the Sphinx Temple, reveals wonderfully fitted blocks, which perhaps housed specific solar rituals related to the deified pharaoh. The choice of a lion also embodies warlike vigor, enhancing the royal aura in the eyes of all. The simultaneous presence of the Pyramid of Khafre and the Great Sphinx illustrates the extent of the skills acquired since the first step pyramids. The workers exploit nearby quarries, carefully shape each block, and then resort to seasonal corvées for river transport on the Nile. With the help of levers, logs, and inclined ramps, they lift the stones to the upper courses. The limestone-granite tandem offers remarkable resistance, manifesting the king's ambition to mark the space with an imperishable imprint. The mortuary temple, attached to the eastern face of the pyramid, served as a stage for daily offerings, keeping the spiritual presence of Khafre active. Monumental polished granite pillars punctuate the space, echoing the principle of strict symmetry, while reliefs, now lost, probably displayed the devotion of the priests. This architectural ensemble, embellished with a causeway, testifies to an accomplished art where technique and the sacred coexist. Beyond the strictly funerary aspect, Khafre's iconography refers to solar power as evidenced by the king's association with the lion, a protective figure. The Sphinx expresses this connection, with the feline body symbolizing unstoppable strength and the royal head embodying sacred intelligence. The priests in charge of the cult likely recite consecrated formulas, linking the horizon of the rising sun to the sovereign's permanence. The monumentality of the great feline attests to remarkable artistic expertise, as the limestone rock at Giza requires complex carving techniques. Repair traces also indicate that this sculpture has endured wind erosion and degradation by shifting sand. Despite these assaults, the effigy remains like a cosmic sentinel, watching over the necropolis and connecting the earthly domain to the divine spheres. It alone symbolizes the essential union between man and the sky, guaranteeing the eternal posterity of Khafre. Within this vast panorama, Menkaure, traditionally the successor of Khafre, raised his own pyramid, smaller than those of his predecessors. Dated to around the end of the 26th or the beginning of the 25th century before Christ, it features a partial cladding of pink granite, contrasting with the usual limestone. 3 subsidiary pyramids, sometimes intended for queens or other royal members, align nearby, illustrating the persistence of an ever-evolving funerary tradition. Though less imposing, the edifice does not lack technical qualities, evidenced by the precision of its internal chambers and the near-perfect orientation of its base. The granite blocks reflect a desire for distinction, perhaps highlighting an ambition to innovate without denying the lineage's heritage. Its mortuary temple, although less documented, falls within the ritual continuity, preserving the royal essence and ensuring the eternity of power, even at the cost of adaptation. The importance of Menkaure is also revealed in the remarkable statues found on the site, some depicting the king alongside divine or feminine entities. These statuary groups, carved in schist, highlight the duality of the monarch, both human and divine. The art of the 4th dynasty favors an idealized representation, serene features, a dignified bearing, and a hieratic attitude. At Menkaure's Valley Temple, archaeologists discovered fragments of reliefs attesting to a cult, supported by regular distributions of food offerings. As with Khafre, the funerary causeway connects this temple to the pyramid, consolidating the sacred axis between the Nile and the royal edifice. Although more modest than that of Khufu, Menkaure's pyramid perpetuates the idea of unifying architecture, where each stone contributes to the pharaoh's elevation to the rank of a solar being. The ensemble remains an heir to tradition, while anticipating certain future evolutions, marking a pivotal stage. On the entire plateau, the dynastic continuity is evident through the careful placement of temples, causeways, and mastabas reserved for the elites. The scribes meticulously record the allocation of resources, from grain storage to the distribution of beer and bread for the workers. This coordinated logistics, supported by a centralized royal administration, explains the longevity of these monumental structures. Boats dock at the wharves during the flooding season, transporting granite, a luxury product, and limestone, the primary material. In the Valley Temple of Khafre, as well as in that of Menkaure, the basalt floors evoke the solidity of the link between the earth and the divine. Under the aegis of the priests, the cycle of offerings continues, ensuring the posthumous survival of the sovereigns, while reaffirming their protective role. This confirms the idea that each construction goes beyond the simple act of royal burial. With Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, Giza's horizon composes an unmatched triptych. The Pyramid of Khafre, rising on a rocky base overlooking that of Khufu, still flaunts its upper casing, a reminder of the initial splendor. The Sphinx, as a leonine sentinel, completes the majesty of the site. It unites the royal figure with the solar power, protects the causeway, and embodies cosmic vigilance. Menkaure, more modest but ambitious, adds a touch of pink granite, thus sculpting his dynastic uniqueness. The ensemble results from a centralized administration, structured technical knowledge, and a profound religious anchor. This is evidenced by the methodical alignment of the monuments, the mastery of river transport, and the continuous effort to perpetuate the royal function beyond death. Through these stones, each pharaoh seeks to seal his posterity in the collective memory, inscribing Giza in the pantheon of the greatest human achievements, without ever breaking the thread of ancestral sacredness. In the 3rd millennium before Christ, the construction of a monument as colossal as the Great Pyramid required a continuous and organized human presence. Around the Giza Plateau, worker hamlets developed to meet the daily needs of thousands of people who were mobilized, sometimes seasonally, sometimes permanently. These groupings included rudimentary but functional dwellings, structured in quarters where masons, carriers, stonecutters, quarry workers, and numerous artisans mingled. The workers lived in partially ephemeral camps, often reconstructed as the site progressed. Modern excavations have uncovered bakeries equipped with raw brick ovens, capable of continuously producing a dense and nourishing bread essential to the Egyptian diet of the time. Breweries, sometimes adjoining the bakeries, brewed a thick and low-alcohol beer, considered a liquid food rich in calories. In specialized workshops, ropes, tools, and linen fabrics necessary for the advancement of the project were manufactured. Weavers worked on vertical looms, while copper artisans sharpened picks, chisels, and saws for cutting the stone. These workers were divided into teams sometimes referred to as gangs, by analogy with the wall inscriptions and graffiti found on the blocks. One can spot facetious or valorizing names like Friends of Khufu or Intoxication of Khafre, which revealed a group spirit and a certain pride of belonging. These markings, painted or engraved directly on the stone, were likely used to signal the production of each team and boast of their contribution, in a universe where collective achievement supported the pharaoh's legitimacy. One can imagine joyful rivalries between these groups, each trying to outdo the other in block placement speed or the precision of limestone work. The food logistics, a crucial point of any large construction site, were organized into a real rationing system. Chickens, goats, and sometimes cattle served as a reserve of meat, while basins or nets allowed fishing in the canals connected to the Nile. Legumes, such as lentils and chickpeas, complemented this diet, providing essential proteins and fibers. Thanks to the annual flooding of the Nile, the fellows could also bring grains and other provisions to sustain these workers. A diet rich in carbohydrates and proteins was essential to support physical effort, especially during block pulling or stone cutting phases. The issue of health and care is also important for understanding the social functioning of the construction site. Human remains found in worker graves around Giza show that traumatic injuries, such as fractures, were sometimes treated. Rudimentary splints made of linen and wood allowed a broken limb to be kept in place. There are also traces of ointments and bandages, indicating that the Egyptians had a pharmacopoeia based on plants. Certain pathologies observed on the skeletons, such as osteoarthritis or microtraumas of the spine, bear witness to the intense efforts related to carrying and lifting heavy loads. These medical clues allow us to nuance the idea of a slave workforce left without assistance. The existence of care and lodging solutions indicates a more nuanced status, where the presence of workers was valued and maintained in a stable manner. The statuses precisely of these builders were varied. The fellahs, farmers mobilized during the flood period of the Nile, formed a seasonal workforce that, instead of working their fields submerged by the waters, dedicated themselves to the king's major construction projects. In contrast, permanent artisans, paid and housed, ensured the continuity of the work and transmitted their expertise in stone quarrying or in the sculpting of bas-reliefs. Historians thus highlight the modern myth of construction by masses of slaves. Archaeological research suggests rather a society in which structured trades were mobilized and supervised, benefiting from social recognition and working conditions regulated by the royal administration. This supervision took the form of a clear hierarchy, where scribes and foremen played a decisive role. The scribes, trained in hieroglyphic or hieratic writing, recorded each delivery of blocks and noted the number of rations distributed of bread and beer containers. They ensured that each group had the necessary tools and materials while keeping track of completed pieces. The foremen, elected or appointed for their skills, ensured the proper distribution of workers on the site and the respective deadlines. At the top of this social pyramid, the architects oversaw the whole, ensuring both the precision of the structure and the coordination of the different teams. They often enjoyed a close proximity to the royal court, some, like Imhotep in the time of Djoser, even being considered as sages inspired by the gods. The daily cult, in this context, was not limited to the only monumental temples we imagine. Offering chapels, more modest, existed near the villagers to honor local deities, the protective gods of the construction site, and the memory of the sovereign. Specialized priest servants contributed to the funerary cult from the early stages of construction, ensuring the sacred link between the material life of the workers and the eternal destiny of the pharaoh. These priests often lived nearby and maintained a cult rhythmically marked by daily rituals, which involved bringing libations, burning incense, or offering food. The allocations of land granted by the central power provided the resources necessary for these liturgical practices. The agricultural production from these plots was partly assigned to the perpetual maintenance of the cult and the supply of the temple servants. The workers themselves could participate in occasional ceremonies to invoke divine protection and the success of the architectural endeavor. The colossal monuments erected on the Giza plateau, and more particularly the Great Pyramid of Khufu, fulfill multiple roles deeply rooted in the Egyptian conception of kingship and the afterlife. To those who built it in the middle of the 3rd millennium before Christi, this pyramid first serves as a tomb for the sovereign, but it also acts as a spiritual device, allowing the monarch to join the divine world and unite with cosmic forces. The Egyptians, whose religion is nourished by daily observations of the Nile, the sun, and the stars, develop a complex theology in which the king holds a unique status, simultaneously as a protector of cosmic order and a pivot of sun worship. His monumental tomb, precisely arranged, corresponds to several essential functions, housing the royal remains, embodying the theological ideals related to the cult of Ra, the sun god, and serving as a machine of eternity, ensuring the perpetuity of power and Mayat, a concept designating universal balance. The carefully arranged geometric shapes, numerous internal corridors, and ritual decoration combine to compose a structure that connects the earth, the sky, and the divine spaces. Through this architecture, the entire symbolism of the deified king is expressed in the material. Each imposing stone is a testament to the spiritual ambition of a people who wish to perpetuate the royal existence beyond death and affirm universal stability. First and foremost, the pyramid is designed as a tomb. In the funerary traditions of the Old Kingdom, the sovereign, once deceased, must be physically preserved through the process of mummification so that his soul can continue to exist and move freely in the afterlife. The term commonly used to describe the Egyptian tomb is the House of Eternity. For a king such as Khufu, whose dating is approximately around 2600 before Christ, during the 4th dynasty, this posthumous abode reaches spectacular proportions. Gathering within it the royal remains, cultic objects, and offerings deposited by priests, the pyramid guarantees the pharaoh a closed and inviolable environment meant to house his vital force, called K. The internal structure is organized around ceremonial chambers, circulation corridors, and, in the case of the Great Pyramid, relief devices intended to distribute the pressures exerted by the monumental weight. In Egyptian ideology, a king stands at the top of the human hierarchy, but also at the crossroads of the divine world. He embodies the unifier of the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, and he protects the country against chaos. At his death, all these attributes are inscribed in a complex ritual, so that his body, the precious receptacle of sacred essence, is preserved from weather and desecration. The pyramid thus becomes the physical nucleus of this ritual system. Its height, orientation, and the use of durable materials like Tura limestone or Aswan granite contribute to making this last abode an indestructible refuge. The objects placed in the annexes or adjacent chambers, such as vessels, furniture, and symbols of power, accompany the remains as offerings, ensuring the continuity of his status in the afterlife. Beyond the simple function of a burial site, the pyramid, in the Egyptian concept, participates in solar cosmology. The king, generally referred to as the son of Re, derives his legitimacy from this affiliation with the sun god. Observation of the daytime star, master of the day-night cycle, inspired the Egyptians with the idea that death is not an absolute end, but a passage to another form of existence, similar to Re's daily journey through the sky and the underworld. The smooth faces of a pyramid like that of Khufu, once covered with finely polished casing blocks, vividly reflected the sunlight. This almost dazzling surface showcased the divine power of the sovereign, who was supposed to join the solar path after death. The Egyptian term designating the pyramid encompasses the connotations of the horizon, the meeting point between earth and sky. The daily course of the sun, rising in the east in the morning and setting in the west at dusk, symbolizes the perpetual renewal of life and the rebirth of the royal soul. In the funerary context, the connection with the stars also plays a prominent role, especially the circumpolar stars, considered imperishable because they never set below the horizon. The alignments of the Great Pyramid, very close to the cardinal points, suggest that the architects used the stars to orient the structure in a way that favored the celestial ascent of the deceased. Thus, the entire edifice is part of a grand scheme. The pyramid is the springboard that allows the king to leave the earthly world and merge with cosmic forces, particularly with Re. The beliefs regarding the king's fate in the afterlife are rooted in a corpus of writings that Egyptologists have grouped under the name pyramid texts. Although the complete form of these inscriptions unfolds mainly in the 5th and 6th dynasties around 2400 before Christ, the central ideas already appear in the time of Khufu. The ceremonies, prayers, and magical formulas engraved on the interior walls of later pyramids aim to guide the sovereign's spirit, to protect him from the dangers threatening his journey in the Duat, the Egyptian afterlife, and to ensure his eternal sustenance. The pyramid texts abundantly evoke the liturgy of offerings. Every day, priests place food, drinks, and various ritual objects in the adjacent funerary temples so that the king's vital energy never wanes. Although the Great Pyramid does not feature these texts engraved on its walls, it fits within the same system of beliefs and practices. Oral offerings, pronounced to animate the meals intended for the king's ba, a component of the soul, already exist at this time and continue in the following centuries. The ceremonies depicted in the tombs of the royal entourage and in slightly later pyramids show the complexity of the ritual, protective formulas, invocations to Re, and liturgical instructions. The Egyptians placed great importance on the power of words. Properly spoken, sacred formulas surely guaranteed the passage through trials. In this context, architecture itself becomes a vector of theological meaning. The angles, slopes, and axes of the pyramid convey the builder's desire to anchor the structure in a powerful metaphor, that of the primordial mound, the Benben, which according to mythology emerged from the waters of Nun at the creation of the world. Every pyramidal edifice refers to this primordial eminence, from which Re, the symbol of emerging light, arises. The internal conduits, whose exact function may puzzle the modern visitor, adhere to this same logic. They facilitate the circulation of invisible energies, whether they come from the earth or the stars, and can serve as spiritual paths for the ascent of the deceased king. Similarly, the presence of false doors, typical of funerary complexes, remains essential since each symbolic passage opens towards the afterlife, while maintaining the connection with the living who deposit offerings. Such an architectural principle embodies Egyptian theology, according to which the boundary between the tangible world and the divine spheres is porous. The pharaoh, in his capacity as a mediator, perfectly illustrates this constant communication. This function of mediation is also reflected in the meticulous care given to construction materials. The limestone, sourced from the plateau itself, symbolizes terrestrial permanence, while the purer and more dazzling Tura limestone and granite from Aswan represent refinement, strength, and solar power. Together, they form a sacred vessel where each block, cut and fitted to perfection, contributes to the expression of royal destiny. In line with this symbolism, the presence of boat pits around the royal pyramids, especially those of Khufu, underlines the importance of celestial navigation in Egyptian thought. The most famous of these ritual boats, found disassembled near the Great Pyramid, demonstrates remarkable naval craftsmanship. Several dozen wooden pieces were assembled with astonishing technical precision to build a ship about 30 meters long. These boats, linked to the king's journey with Ra, play an essential role in the passage rituals. In solar mythology, Ra traverses the sky on the day boat, then crosses the underworld on the night boat. The deceased sovereign aspires to take his place on these divine vessels, to move freely through the different regions of the universe and ensure the regularity of the cosmic cycle. The pits dug in the immediate vicinity of the pyramid thus signal the desire to offer the king the means to continue his journey alongside the sun god. Some researchers believe that these boats could have been used in ritual processions during his lifetime, carrying the royal statue or accompanying the cult before being buried to serve in the afterlife. Others see them mainly as a symbol, an architectural and funerary message, materializing the king's participation in the cosmic journey. The celebration of the funerary cult around the great Egyptian pyramids involves a genuine economic and logistical network. From the end of the construction, when the tomb is ready to receive the royal body, a perpetual service program is put in place. Agricultural domains, sometimes located several tens of kilometers away, are officially assigned to the operation of the funerary cult. They provide grains, cattle, and raw materials needed for the daily rites. Teams of priests take turns according to a precise schedule, ensuring regular offerings of food, drink, and incense. In return, these service lenders receive shares of the administrative production and income in the form of grains, meat, fabrics, or even imported products. The funerary temple attached to the pyramid includes storage magazines where goods and worship objects are kept. Lists of offerings, some of which are engraved or painted on the walls, specify the required quantities for each day and for certain specific religious festivals: bread, beer, vegetables, fruits, wines, oils, and sometimes elaborate pastries. Over time, as the centuries pass and the prosperity of the kingdom fluctuates, supply might decrease or shift toward new forms of support. Nevertheless, the principle remains. The funerary cult of a king of the 4th dynasty is conceived as an integral part of the economy and social organization, mobilizing farmers, scribes, craftsmen, and priests in a redistribution cycle typical of the Egyptian civilization. If we now consider the representations and images associated with these funerary complexes, we notice that the majority of the original decorations of the Old Kingdom has disappeared, often due to time or subsequent recoveries. However, invaluable remnants indicate that sculptures and paintings adorn the valley temples and the upper temple next to the pyramid. The cult statues, notably, held particularly strong significance. They embodied the perpetual presence of the sovereign, allowing his spirit to reside in a tangible form. In the Valley Temple of Khafre, for example, the famous seated statue of the king was found, carved out of black diorite, illustrating the majesty of this pharaoh and his connection with the falcon god Horus. For Khufu, only a very small ivory statue found in Abydos remains, suggesting the existence of more imposing representations once preserved in his complex. The walls of the funerary temples could be adorned with panels depicting offering processions, lists of goods, and scenes commemorating the consecration of the pyramid. There were also narrative registers showing the sovereign before the gods, reinforcing his status both political and divine. In Egyptian conception, the image is an active support. It extends life, helps accompany the deceased towards full integration into the cosmic order, and maintains the memory of the monarch among the living. All this contributes to creating a visual universe where power, stability, and the sacred reign. Over the centuries, the monuments of Giza have elicited numerous interpretations, sometimes far removed from the original intent of the builders. In late antiquity and the Middle Ages, some Greek, Roman, or Arab observers believed that the pyramids contained fabulous treasures or served as grain stores. In the modern era, various pseudoscientific theories emerged, grouped under the name of pyramidology. People saw hidden mathematical codes, universal measurements, or prophetic hinges. Other mystical currents claimed that cosmic radiation flooded the interior of the Great Pyramid, aiding in food preservation or blade sharpening. Nevertheless, archaeological excavations and in-depth study of architectural remains confirm the funerary and cultic purpose of these edifices. The gang inscriptions found in hidden areas, proving the involvement of Khufu's teams, highlight the human and technical organization required for such a large-scale project. The testimonies recalling rites and offerings reinforce the idea that these constructions are neither grain storage buildings nor receptacles of esoteric energies, but rather the resting place of a king wishing to join Ra in his eternal celestial journey. Alternative interpretations remain a cultural phenomenon, however. They testify to the persistent fascination these monuments arouse and the draw of a past considered mysterious, where myth and reality mingle to fuel the collective imagination. When the Fourth Dynasty comes to an end, Egypt enters a phase of gradual transformation that extends throughout the third millennium before Christ. The gigantic Pyramids of Giza, erected by Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, had already established the image of an all-powerful royalty, keen to assert its connection with the divine. However, at the dawn of the Fifth Dynasty, the pharaohs chose to place their funerary complexes elsewhere, mainly at Abu Sir and then at Saqqara. The reasons for this shift are multiple. There is a desire to assert the importance of new cults, notably that of Ra, while some Heliopolitan sanctuaries gained prestige. The pyramids erected at Abu Sir by sovereigns such as Sahure or Nefertari do not reach the monumentality of those at Giza. Nonetheless, they remain recognized royal tombs, accompanied by solar temples that demonstrate increased devotion to the sun god. This period is also marked by the emergence of the first pyramid texts, long corpora of inscriptions intended to protect the deceased king and guide him into the afterlife. Engraved on the inner walls of funeral chambers, they offer a complex liturgy whose use would increase. By opting for smaller pyramids, the pharaohs of the Fifth Dynasty demonstrate both a lack of resources compared to previous splendor and a desire to emphasize theological elements. At Giza, the already erected grand monuments retain immense prestige, but attention gradually shifts toward new cultic centers, more aligned with the emerging religious trends. Nonetheless, this transition does not imply a sudden abandonment. There remain priests attached to the ancient temples, still benefiting from lands and resources bequeathed by previous kings, although this legacy could sometimes be revised with dynastic changes. During the 5th and 6th dynasties, Giza remains indeed a cultic center that would be perilous to neglect. The priests who served the temples of Khufu and Khafre continued to maintain rites intended to ensure the spiritual survival of the deceased monarchs. Land endowments, once allocated to meet the needs of the clergy and finance daily offerings, remain in force, even though adjustments can be observed here and there. Scribes carefully record the distribution of bread, beer, and other goods devoted to the cult. As time goes on, however, the central administration finds it increasingly difficult to supervise all the funerary complexes. The maintenance costs rise, while the labor levies essential for the upkeep or renovation of the buildings become harder to summon. Repairs, when they occur, often merely address urgent issues: a cracked wall, flaking decoration, or a significant fissure in masonry. Despite these constraints, Giza retains considerable aura. High-ranking dignitaries, eager to associate themselves with the grandeur of the Old Kingdom, are keen to be buried there. For many, the plateau remains the sacred land, where they wish to build their eternal abode, convinced that the omnipresence of the Great Pyramids will favor the perpetuation of the soul. Ruling pharaohs, for their part, now prefer Abu Sir or Saqqara for their own complexes, more modest in general appearance but still endowed with certain symbolic importance. Solar temples, which appeared prominently under Sahur, take on a new form that reinforces the Heliopolitan cult without erasing Giza's legacy. In the background, a powerful decentralization movement transforms the political landscape of Egypt. Nomarchs, local governors of each nome, gain more autonomy in the management of lands, tax collection, and organization of labor levies. They consolidate their positions, sometimes leading their own policy in their province, which weakens the direct authority of the pharaoh. Where, under the 4th dynasty, the sovereign could easily mobilize vast contingents of workers to launch a massive project, assembling such labor becomes more challenging. Peasants must first attend to local needs, and the nomarchs ensure that their own projects, such as canal digging, stele erection, or regional temple construction, are considered. In this context, simultaneously supporting the constant maintenance of Giza's monumental structures proves costly. The trade flows, which previously generated multiple resources, notably wood, metals, and precious stones, fluctuate according to alliances or minor border conflicts. Royal constructions, once centered on pharaonic pyramids, multiply, but with more scattered means. The clergy, on the other hand, sometimes struggle to gather enough agricultural products to meet ritual obligations. Giza's status, while still elevated, is no longer at the exclusive heart of royal strategy. While the pyramids of Abu Sir or Saqqara receive the bulk of attention and resources, Giza suffers from a progressive weakening of central power, even though there is no clear intent to undermine the site. At the end of the 6th dynasty, the Old Kingdom is going through a growing crisis. The very long reigns, like that of Pepi II, are not enough to maintain the hegemony of the pharaohs over the entire country. Economic tensions are rising, and the management of allocations, once generous, becomes problematic. Some sectors, less monitored, begin to deteriorate. In some secondary pyramids, blocks are occasionally removed to reuse the stone, deemed more useful in other urgent constructions. At Giza, this phenomenon remains limited, but there are archaeological indicators pointing to the taking of materials from annexes or potentially cracked enclosure walls. The rulers, scraping together funds as they can, are no longer able to maintain the entirety of the memorial sites inherited from the 4th dynasty. The pyramid texts, once centered on the royal figure, continue to evolve, but the means to engrave them are dwindling. Manuscripts on papyrus, now lost, may have circulated, at least allowing the tradition to be perpetuated. It is a period that heralds the first intermediate period, marked by fragmentations of power, the emergence of competing dynasties, and the reduction of great expeditions. The revaluation of certain rural areas by the nomarchs, who have become almost autonomous, further intensifies the abandonment of some funerary monuments. Nevertheless, Giza does not lose its prestige overnight. It remains the necropolis of the greatest builders, a symbol of bygone power respected even if it can no longer be fully revived. During this phase, the memory of Giza remains alive, without being the subject of systematic maintenance. The priests already established on the plateau try to continue their offices, but the influx of goods and provisions declines considerably. The revenues that used to pay the officiants and provide daily offerings no longer always reach Memphis, the weakened seat of the central government. In the peripheral areas of the plateau, the sand, carried by the wind, accumulates on access paths and partially covers the less frequented chapels. The complex ramifications of the ancient causeways connecting temples and pyramids gradually fill in. Statues and steles near the main roads can be occasionally maintained, but the more distant sectors suffer from a lack of manpower and technical means. Fragments of hieroglyphs from ancient chapels sometimes lie beneath several layers of sediment. Despite this retreat, the very idea of Giza as a sacred center does not disappear. The texts preserved in some officials' tombs remind us that being buried close to the great pharaohs remains an honor. Sporadic offerings made by a few devoted notables help ensure a semblance of worship. The site, partly surrendered to the desert's assaults, therefore does not fall into oblivion. It rather goes through a period of intermittent management, dependent on the scarce resources allocated by a central power too weak to preserve everything. In the necropolises that still border the Great Pyramids, the tradition of mastabas continues, reflecting a tenacious aspiration to be buried near these legendary edifices. From the very first dynasties, these rectangular tombs, made of mud brick or stone, provided an intermediate funeral solution between a simple pit and the royal pyramid. During the 5th and 6th dynasties, we see an enrichment of the interior decorations. High officials would have their titles, exploits, or even a brief autobiography detailing their pious or administrative actions engraved. Where older tombs limited the representation to the deceased and a few servants, later mastabas sometimes included vibrant reliefs showing hunting, fishing, or the reception of offerings. Numerous panels also celebrate the privileged relationship between the tomb owner and the king, showing that despite decentralization, the monarchical ideal remained a powerful reference. The engraved formulas evoke the justice dispensed to the nome, generosity towards temples, and piety towards the ancient gods. Such autobiographical inscriptions illustrate the desire to leave a lasting testimony, ensuring the survival of the soul. Thus, the mastaba evolves in tandem with the reorganization of Egyptian society. The hierarchy becomes more nuanced, and local powers grow stronger, but the prestige attached to the Giza area persists. Dignitaries seek to combine their personal reputation with the sacred aura of the Great Pyramids. Thus, even though the power of the Old Kingdom wanes, Giza continues to welcome the burials of notables, all eager to affirm their spiritual anchoring in the shadow cast by the prestigious history of the 4th dynasty builders. At the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, around 2050 to 1800 before Christ, Egypt emerges from a troubled period known as the First Intermediate Period. The pharaohs of the 11th and especially the 12th dynasty, including its founder Amenemhat I around 1991 before Christ, endeavor to consolidate the regained unity. In this context, the memory of the Old Kingdom, synonymous with strong centralization and grand architectural projects, returns as an ideological pillar. Sovereigns then draw from the memory of the gigantic funerary complexes of Giza to restore a form of national grandeur. This approach is manifested through restoration acts, expressions of piety towards the ancestors of the Old Kingdom, as well as occasional architectural interventions on the plateau. As both symbol and source of inspiration, the site of Giza remains a living monument in the collective imagination, a place where the visitor of the Middle Kingdom can witness the unparalleled power of the pharaohs of the 4th dynasty. From the reign of Amenemhat I, a political and religious action emerges. The heritage of the Old Kingdom is valued to strengthen the legitimacy of the new dynasty. Inscriptions sometimes reveal formulas evoking the rebirth of the old order, implicitly referencing the stable 4th dynasty, famous for Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, builders of Giza. This piety towards the ancestors is not just rhetoric. Some sovereigns of the 12th dynasty undertake minor maintenance tasks in various zones of the old funerary plateau. Some blocks are reworked, corridors are cleared of sand, or slabs are repositioned to stabilize damaged corridors. King Senusret III, around 1971. Before Christ, direct successor of Amenemhat III, reveals in some inscriptions the idea that these colossal monuments, once considered the eternal abode of deceased kings, remain sacred and require continual respect. Beyond Giza, traces of restorations can also be found in temples or cult statues of pharaohs of the Old Kingdom, indicating that the royal piety of the 12th dynasty extends beyond the architectural sphere to the ritual and memorial field. Organized ceremonies, sometimes accompanied by processions, aim to solidify the symbolic lineage with the great builders of the past. Succumbing to the fascination for these ancestors, these pharaohs emphasize dynastic continuity. They present themselves as direct heirs, capable of claiming both the prestige and the administrative wisdom of the ancient kings. As a result, the restoration of certain damaged structures or steles is not just a practical action. It transforms into a pledge of respect for tradition and a sign of renewal for the cult. Sometimes, Egyptologists hypothesize that the recarving of erased hieroglyphs or the restoration of broken statues also serve to mark the active presence of power. The inscriptions showing the cartouche of the restorative pharaoh alongside that of Khufu or Khafre reinforce the idea of an unbroken lineage, thus uniting the prestigious past and the conquering present. If piety towards the Old Kingdom remains sincere, this does not prevent a widespread practice in ancient Egypt, the reuse of stone blocks for new constructions. During the Middle Kingdom, the state revived grand architectural programs, especially in royal capitals like Ich-Tawi, the new city founded by Amenemhat I, or in provincial sites benefiting from the impetus of a better structured administration. To supply these construction sites, some blocks taken from little-used funerary annexes or from structures damaged by time are dismantled and transported to new projects. However, it is necessary to temper the image of systematic pillaging. The sovereigns of the 12th dynasty seem aware of the symbolic importance of Giza. The main pyramids, those of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, retain their intact character. Reuse seems concentrated, it seems, on more modest corners, such as certain enclosure walls, abandoned walkways, or very damaged secondary chapels. Modern archaeologists have noted clues of limited extractions, carried out with a certain regularity, but without seeking to demolish the major monuments. At the same time, occasional stabilization interventions are carried out because the passage of centuries does not spare these buildings. Some siding plates threaten to fall, corridors fill with sand, making access difficult, and soil erosion can weaken the funerary corridors. Artisans dispatched on site sometimes repair a paving or a lintel that threatens to crack. This stabilization work proves that despite the material reuses, there is a will to preserve the sacred integrity of the site and its great pyramids. The caution with which these selections of blocks or repairs are carried out translates an equilibrium between material interest and the awareness of the religious and historical value of the plateau. The takeover of the country by the 12th dynasty is accompanied by a new, more rigorous bureaucratic organization, which also affects the management of past royal necropolises. Officials tasked with supervising Giza keep records on the state of the constructions, the measures to be taken to maintain the whole in good order, but also on the guarding of the places and the regulation of visits. Scribes record the movements of stones, the names of foremen responsible for refurbishments, and keep updated lists of necessary resources. The establishment of a strong central administration aims to prevent the dispersion of power and the quasi-independent authority of the nomarchs, the high local officials, which characterize the first intermediate period. Now, each project, including those related to the restorations of ancient monuments, must be validated by royal authority. Archives discovered at other sites, like those of Lahun, a worker town close to the pyramid complex of Senusret II, or similar documents, suggest the existence of a similar organization wherever the state launches projects. It is thus imagined that at Giza, this same rigor is transposed. Authorizations, inventories, precise retention of removed or replaced blocks, reporting on the necessity to support such and such limestone beam, and possibly signaling emergency works to prevent a collapse. Administrative archives from the era also recount funerary cults. Giza, although ancient, is part of a vast network of mortuary temples and completed foundations. Priests and guardians must procure offerings, which implies a redistribution system that continues, at least partially, to provide for agricultural or artisanal specialties to honor royal memory. This strong reorganization of the cult reflects the will of a powerful king who controls everything from dynastic propaganda to the concrete aspects of maintaining monuments. In the Middle Kingdom, literary production develops notably, be it wisdom texts, official chronicles, or fictional tales. Through these writings, recurring mentions of the Golden Age represented by the Old Kingdom can be detected. The pyramid-building kings, such as Khufu and his successors, are sometimes cited as examples of provident rulers, masters of grandiose and orderly architecture. Compositions like the Prophecy of Nefertiti or the Tale of Senu, even if they do not directly focus on Giza, provide insight into the importance restored to the notion of solid royal tradition. In these tales, the glorious past serves as a moral and political reference point. They evoke the figure of the ideal pharaoh, capable of uniting the country and erecting lasting monuments. Giza remains the most imposing reference. The accounts do not fail to celebrate the technical feat that was the erection of the Great Pyramids, likened to a sort of miracle accomplished under divine blessing. This cult of the past leads to the writing of royal lists in which the rulers of the Old Kingdom hold a predominant place. Scribes realize the symbolic power represented by mentioning a Khufu or a Khafre in an ancestral register. Some Middle Kingdom temples, built far from the Giza plateau, display reliefs that recall the ancient lineage, indicating that literary culture at that time shapes the perception and memory of the archaic period of pharaonic Egypt. This scriptural elaboration eventually solidifies the idea that the pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom, proclaiming their lineage, continue the civilizational work initiated a few centuries earlier. These texts, praising past grandeur, also reflect in the private tombs of high dignitaries. The biographies engraved in their chapels often narrate missions, particularly those related to restorations of ancient sites. Such and such vizier or architect prides himself on having overseen an essential repair, always in the name of the reigning king, keen to inscribe his reign in the continuity of a centuries-old heritage. All of this contributes to nurturing the collective narrative of a united Egypt, proud of its past, and turned toward the future, where the exemplar of builder kings continues to resonate in minds. During the Middle Kingdom, while the great royal funerary complexes mostly shift to the Fayoum region and the vicinity of the new capital Ichtawi, the memory of Giza remains an inescapable model. The new pharaohs, particularly Senusret III around 1878 before Christ and Amenemhat III around 1842 before Christ, conceived their pyramids with architecture combining stone and mud bricks, while embracing the main idea of a coherent complex, associating funerary temple, causeway, and ritual installations. Even if the proportions no longer reach those of Khufu, the harmonization of volumes and the pursuit of a strong image refer back to that golden age. Provincial elites, too, draw inspiration from the aesthetics and overall plan of Giza for their own sepulchres. The mastabas often take the old quadrangular plans as a reference. The monumental dimension is sometimes imitated on a smaller scale. Straight corridors, carefully orthogonal walls, decorated chapels where offerings can be made. This Gizihization of the tombs is noticeable in the preference for the false door stela, reproduced on the west wall, reminiscent of the symbolism of the West and its connection to the abode of the dead. The concept of an oriented axis is also preserved, emphasizing the attention paid to sacred geometry, once mastered at Giza, to align pyramids on the cardinal points or certain stars. Middle Kingdom architects adapt these principles to the needs of their time, while proudly claiming the cultural affiliation with the Old Kingdom. In the royal framework, the explicit reference to the Old Kingdom serves to enhance the prestige of a monarchy, seeking to assert its authority over the entire territory. Foundation stelae, or dedication texts, often emphasize the continuity of the royal function since the dawn of time. The names of Khufu, Khafre, or Menkaure are sometimes mentioned as those who initiated the tradition of great tombs. Thus, Giza becomes an ideal standard. Even if the architectural reality has evolved, the memory of the plateau remains an emblem that the kings of the Middle Kingdom continue to venerate. The sculpture and decoration workshops also perpetuate this admiration. In their reliefs or statues, artisans evoke the imposing stature of the Old Kingdom, sometimes seeking to reproduce or reinvent ancient aesthetic canons. Recurrent offerings are recorded, testifying to a continuous, albeit more discreet, cult compared to when Giza was the nerve center of Egyptian civilization. The lists of funerary clergy, which were renewed over the decades, clearly show the presence of priests dedicated to the maintenance of earlier royal chapels. The influence of Giza thus extends beyond mere restoration, becoming a vehicle of identity. The Middle Kingdom is marked by efforts of national cohesion, and it is these grand monuments, more than any other relic, that crystallize the notion of a common past. The horizon of Khufu remains synonymous with an era of prosperity and authority that the 12th dynasty seeks to match or even surpass in order to consolidate its power. The example of Giza is also used to validate the superiority of royalty over any other form of political organization. The gigantism of the Old Kingdom is not only a technical feat, but a proof of state stability claimed by the Middle Kingdom. In the province, some governors or nomarchs, though under strict royal tutelage, have themselves buried in mastabas directly inspired by ancient tombs. Small private pyramids appear, often modest, whose architectural principle recalls that of Giza, but adapted to a local scale. The reliefs and inscriptions sometimes refer to the original House of Eternity, inaugurated by great kings, signifying direct lineage or recognition of central authority. Meanwhile, priests preserve the rites and funeral chants, which, although not identical to those of the Fourth Dynasty, maintain the coherence of a faith in which the king remains the sacred intermediary between the gods and men. For the Egyptians of the Middle Kingdom, Giza does not belong to an extinct past. It is a living reference, a sacred space often evoked in literature, and a stimulus for the new architecture of their time. The restorations, maintenance, measured block extraction, presence of priests and scribes, the writing of texts glorifying the ancient builders. All these elements testify to the continuous breadth of this great royal tradition. The pharaohs of the 12th dynasty, by turning to Giza, thus consolidate their own legitimacy and perpetuate the aura of a site that, already, must have seemed as ancient as it was prestigious. In the New Kingdom, which spans the 18th to the 20th dynasties, from about 1550 to 1069 before Christ, Giza experiences a revival of religious and symbolic interest. Pharaohs, aware of the monumental legacy of the Old Kingdom, intend to link their reign to these prestigious edifices to legitimize their power. Thutmose IV, a sovereign of the 18th dynasty at the end of the 15th century before Christ, perfectly illustrates this approach by having the Great Sphinx cleared, which was then buried under accumulated sand. According to the dream stele he erected between the colossal statue's paws, this prince purportedly received, during his sleep, the certainty that he would ascend to royalty if he liberated the leonine creature. This narrative sanctifies his consecration by linking his coronation to a divine revelation. Amenhotep II, his father, was already admired as a hero, and Thutmose IV thus seeks to confirm his own destiny by affirming his privileged relationship with celestial powers. The Sphinx, often associated with Re-Horakti or Harmakis, is perceived as a solar guardian, protector of royalty. By delivering it from the sands, Thutmose IV announces the resurrection of a sacred force, proving his piety and determination to maintain cosmic order. The site thus regains a central place for worship, and the pharaoh takes advantage of this intervention to consolidate his legitimacy in the eyes of the nobility and priests. The hieroglyphs of the dream stele recount how Thutmose IV, still a prince, fell asleep in the shadow of the Sphinx and received the promise that he would become king if he cleared the statue. This deity, complaining of the neglect it suffered, tied sovereignty to the restoration of the monument. Consequently, Thutmose IV ordered the removal of sand, maintenance of the rock substrate, and repair of certain damaged parts. Blocks were replaced to consolidate the structure, attesting to concrete efforts to preserve the site's integrity. Taking on this role of restorer presented a political challenge. The pharaoh wanted to be seen as the chosen one of the gods, strengthening the allegiance of the court and priests. He also proclaimed his symbolic lineage with the great kings of the Old Kingdom. reminding that Giza remained under divine protection. This initiative reveals a religious pragmatism to honor a sacred heritage while establishing royal authority. The inscriptions report that the region needed intervention to safeguard its cult value. Thutmose IV used this to prove he maintained Ma'at, the essential balance of the universe. This purpose also responded to popular aspirations, as the people, attached to past glory, saw in this action a renewal of Egyptian tradition. For the scribes, these lines validate the royal mission. During the Ramesside period, between the 19th and 20th dynasties, around 1292 to 1069, before Christ the, Giza continued to be a sanctuary where new royal cartouches appeared on earlier remains. The Ramesside rulers, such as Ramses II from 1279 before Christ E, or his successors, approached the monuments of the Old Kingdom as witnesses to be appropriated to consolidate their own glory. The inscription of cartouches on funerary temples, once dedicated to Khufu, Khafre, or Menkaure, illustrates this phenomenon. The Ramessides did not undertake gigantic works, but they carried out targeted restorations, deeming it crucial to preserve these sacred places. A sand-filled corridor was cleared, a cracked facing consolidated, or a weakened lintel replaced. Such interventions, although punctual, demonstrate the desire to affirm continuity between the Ramesside era and the protective powers of the past. Ramses II, in particular, celebrated his reign by associating with the glory of the Builder Kings. He presented himself as the guardian of Ma'at by ensuring the good conservation of this heritage. The plateau, already revered, gained an aura under these rulers who used Giza to legitimize a divine diplomacy. The engraved cartouches, sometimes accompanied by laudatory formulas, paid tribute to ancestors and highlighted the permanence of royal ideology. The partial restorations were part of a political program mobilizing popular respect for these unequaled relics. Alongside the official acts undertaken by the royalty, Giza also attracted a growing number of pilgrims, itinerant priests, and scribes fascinated by the majesty of the pyramids and the imposing presence of the Sphinx. The peripheral temples, once animated by the funerary cults of the Old Kingdom, served as sacred stops for these visitors who came to honor the memory of deified kings and seek their favors. The cult practices, although simplified, compared to the grand state rituals, often consisted of modest offerings, libations, flower deposits, silent prayer before a stele. Votive graffiti multiplied on the walls of the buildings, sometimes hastily engraved, sometimes carefully calligraphed, to express the pilgrims' devotion and wonder at the ancestors' heritage. The priests, whose task was to maintain the veneration of these spaces, documented these inscriptions, updating the temple records. They also monitored the preservation of offerings and the guidance of the faithful, dispensing advice and blessings according to the specific cults rendered in such or such a sanctuary. The scribes, on their side, were interested in ancient texts, lists of goods offered for worship, as well as rites held in honor of the deceased royal lineages. The Giza Plateau, once reserved for a monarch's burial, thus became a true intergenerational pilgrimage site, where past greatness was celebrated in the hope of attracting divine protection. Inside the temples that border the pyramids or rise nearby the Sphinx and the adjacent sanctuaries, objects and offerings are regularly found, testifying to the continuity of the cult. Some statues, installed as eternal representations of people wishing to receive the protection of the gods, sit alongside steles on which hymns or invocation formulas are inscribed. Worshippers, whether they are minor local notables, representatives of a provincial administration, or courtiers attached to the royal court, take advantage of this tradition to ensure a form of spiritual continuity. Often, their names and titles are engraved to extend their memory into the afterlife. The priests, acting as intermediaries, ensure that offerings, foodstuffs, linens, and aromatics are distributed according to the required ritual, while verifying that each gift is properly recorded in the temple registers. A few rare, precious handcrafted objects, such as pectorals adorned with fine stones or metal statuettes, are found during modern excavations, showing that some devotees did not hesitate to dedicate considerable wealth to honor the ancient kings and their associated deities. Scriptural evidence also indicates that the sand, always quick to cover the area with the whims of the winds, represented a constant logistical challenge. It was regularly necessary to clear the access ways, rehabilitate the corridors, restore partially buried steles, and ensure that human presence around the Sphinx could be maintained. This struggle against sand encroachment is accompanied by regular construction projects undertaken under the Ramessides. Blocks are added to fill breaches, and royal stewards ensure the provision of labor, materials, and tools made of bronze or copper. Although less imposing than those of the Old Kingdom, these works require structured logistics. Stonemasons, carpenters, and scribes coordinate to inventory the blocks and monitor the quality of the masonry. Meanwhile, the daily cults continue. Rotating priests, offerings of bread and beer, incense lit according to the ritual. To the eyes of pilgrims, these restorations confirm the vitality of a site where deceased kings still shine. Through this care given to the Giza plateau, the Ramesside pharaohs maintain the idea that the living royalty prolongs the work of their ancestors. Deposits of objects, whether modest terracotta figurines or more precious pieces, strengthen this sacred bond. Inscriptions mention the pride of completing or patrolling these zones to preserve the Ma'at. With each intervention, the memory of the past is revived, and Giza continues to attract a devoted crowd, convinced that the Sphinx and the pyramids harbor a benevolent power, inseparable from the divine horizon. During the Third Intermediate Period, which begins around 1070 before Christ and extends to about 664 before Christ, Egypt goes through a long phase of political division and local tensions. The pharaohs no longer exercise unified control over the entire territory, as several dynasties coexist, sometimes in conflict for domination of the Nile Valley. This fragmentation can be manifested by the emergence of separate kingdoms in the north and south, often under the tutelage of military chiefs or high priests. In Thebes, for example, religious power is considerably strengthened, whereas elsewhere in the Delta, cities organize autonomously. In this context, Giza, famous for its pyramids from the Old Kingdom, no longer occupies the political forefront. However, its historical prestige endures, and local authorities, though sometimes deprived of sufficient means, carry out limited interventions there to maintain the major monuments and show their attachment to the memory of the great past pharaohs. Archaeological documents relating to this period indicate that resources allocated to Giza are sporadic, as priorities are often directed towards economic survival and the defense of more immediately threatened territories. The Libyan dynasties, originating from military leaders of Berber descent, managed to control a large part of Egypt during the Third Intermediate Period, particularly during the 22nd dynasty, around 945 before Christ. Their centers of power were often found in the Delta region, where they fortified cities like Bubastis or Tanis, and focused on consolidating their authority over trade routes. In the south, competing dynasties also claimed to be the legitimate heirs to the pharaonic throne, creating a precarious balance. In Giza, local dignitaries tried to ensure minimal oversight of the ancient structures, which they still considered symbols of past grandeur. The mastabas, dating from the Old Kingdom, held religious appeal, and visits by notables are recorded to commemorate the memory of ancestors. The rare ritualized offerings seem to indicate a partial maintenance of the funerary tradition, but without the grandeur or solemnity characteristic of the great unified eras. After these decades of Libyan domination, Egypt entered, towards the end of the 8th century before Christ, a phase of successive foreign invasions. One of the first upheavals was observed with the arrival of the Kushites, originating from the kingdom of Napata in Nubia, south of the first cataract of the Nile. They established the 25th dynasty around 747 before Christ, renowned for attempting to restore ancient Egyptian traditions, including the cult of Amun in Thebes. The Kushite rulers presented themselves as guarantors of traditional piety and the grandeur of past times. However, despite their religious fervor and efforts to connect their reign to the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom, there are few traces of significant investments in Giza. The Kushites focused more on managing Thebes, on relations with the Delta populations, and on confronting Assyria, an emerging power in the Near East. Around the middle of the 7th century before Christ, the Assyrian Empire, then at its height under the reign of Ashurbanipal in 668 before Christ, took a closer interest in the riches of Egypt. Military campaigns led the Assyrian armies to Memphis, the traditional capital near the Giza plateau. Even though there are no records of massive destructions of the pyramids, the unstable foreign occupation, and internal Egyptian conflicts made any large-scale architectural project in Giza complicated. The Assyrians, specializing in exploiting trade routes and collecting tributes, did not identify Giza as an essential economic center, as most of the trade was then concentrated around waterways and major metropolises. They preferred to place governors or local puppet kings in the delta, aiming less to restore than to control. On the plateau itself, some sporadic developments, likely defensive or logistical in nature, were put in place, but records from the era are sparse. Once the Assyrian yoke was lifted, Egypt slowly recovered under the 26th dynasty, known as the Sate dynasty, in 664 before Christ, which experienced a brief cultural renaissance. This dynasty takes its name from the city of Sais, in the Delta, where pharaohs and elites attempted to restore a more stable state, drawing inspiration from the Old and Middle Kingdoms to legitimize their power. In this momentum, some funerary rituals that had been halted or abandoned were resumed, and cults related to royal ancestors re-emerged. Giza benefited from this relative prosperity. A few small expeditions went there to check the state of the monuments, sometimes laying offerings. However, no major renovations were observed, as available funds were rather allocated to reorganizing the army and administration. While the symbolism of Giza was recognized, the most immediate necessity remained the defense of the borders and political consolidation. Starting from 525. Before Christ, the Persian conquest of Egypt introduced the Achaemenid dynasty, which maintained its presence until 404 before Christ, and again during the 31st dynasty, from 343 to 332 before Christ. The Persians administered Egypt as a satrapy, that is, a province of their vast empire. In this setup, Giza also was not a priority for the Persian governors, who focused mainly on maintaining order and collecting taxes. Religious recognition of local authorities was mainly achieved through the worship of significant state deities like Amun or Ptah, so that the pyramids, even though they embodied a centuries-old symbol for the Egyptians, received little restoration. Some documents suggest a modest exploitation of the surrounding quarries to extract limestone blocks for small funerary or administrative constructions, mainly in the Memphite area. The priests of Giza tried to perpetuate their traditions, but with reduced financial support. From 404 to 343, before Christ, Egypt regained a short-lived independence under the 28th, 29th, and 30th dynasties, but it hardly had the time or resources necessary to pursue a monumental policy of any scale. The new Egyptian kings primarily concerned themselves with repelling potential new Persian campaigns, multiplying diplomatic alliances with Greek cities or other powers. Giza remained on the west bank of the Nile, admired for its religious and ideological value. This late period, before the second resurgence of Achaemenid power in 343 before Christ, accentuated the site's symbolic aspect. The ephemeral pharaohs inherited an Egypt exhausted by decades of conflict, and the Giza plateau represented a glorious memory rather than an active construction site. The funerary sanctuary still served as a reference in texts, but without any notable intervention that would have left a considerable impact on the stone. In 332 before Christ, Alexander the Great entered Egypt, welcomed by a population tired of the Persian rule, and was recognized as the new sovereign. This moment marked the beginning of a profound transformation, as the Macedonian conquest inaugurated the Greek era, followed by the establishment of the Laïcid dynasty, better known as the Ptolemaic dynasty, in 305 before Christ. The Ptolemies, descendants of Ptolemy the Firm, a general of Alexander, adopted pharaonic codes to ensure the legitimacy of their throne while imposing an administration and culture heavily marked by Hellenism. Many Egyptian names were then transcribed into Greek, with spellings that would later traverse centuries to ancient and medieval works. Khufu became Cheops, Khafre transformed into Khephren or Chephren, and Menkaure took the form of Mykerinos or Menkaures. Greek historians and travelers, unaccustomed to Egyptian consonants, thus established writings that would be widely disseminated in the Mediterranean world. During the Ptolemaic period, Egypt experienced a real economic revival, notably thanks to the rise of international trade and the active policy of establishing Greek colonies in the Nile Valley. Alexandria, founded by Alexander, became the dynamic capital of the country, eclipsing Memphis and its surroundings. However, Giza did not disappear. The plateau remained associated with the authority of ancient Egypt, and its pyramids already fascinated new Greek scholars. Some authors, like the famous historian Herodotus, who preceded Alexander's arrival by a few decades and reportedly visited Egypt around 450 before Christ, significantly contributed to the site's renown. Herodotus, considering these monuments as inherited from time immemorial, recorded his observations in his histories, especially in Book 2. He collected oral narratives that mentioned the construction of the pyramids, spoke of countless workers mobilized on the sites, and provided explanations sometimes tinged with myths or fabulous anecdotes. Despite some inaccuracies, his testimony remained very influential in Greek culture and later Roman culture, as it offered a foreign perspective on the majesty of the Old Kingdom. Other Greek authors, less famous, also share their impressions of Ptolemaic Egypt. They often emphasize their amazement at the gigantic dimensions of the pyramids and wonder about the methods used to transport the stone blocks. Some philosophers and geographers then develop their own theories, stimulating an interest in engineering and monumental geometry. This fascination with technical prowess echoes the admiration Greeks have for the imposing architecture of their time, such as that of the great Hellenistic temples. Nevertheless, the Giza Plateau is no longer a major construction center. Sometimes superficial restorations are carried out, and the Ptolemies may, in rare cases, order modifications to facilitate movement or protect sections weakened by time. A notable consequence of the Greek and later Roman presence in Egypt is the small-scale use of certain ancient quarries around Giza. The Ptolemies, along with private entrepreneurs, identify exploitable limestone deposits in the surrounding area for the construction of civil or religious buildings in Alexandria, Memphis, and other burgeoning port cities. The extracted blocks do not all come from the already existing pharaoh structures, as the Ptolemaic rulers seek to spare the Egyptian population by avoiding the destruction of sacred monuments. However, when certain sections collapse or when veneers detach, it is not uncommon for blocks to be reused, especially if their limestone quality is deemed excellent. This practice is not systematic destruction, but rather opportunistic reuse in the context of small urban projects. The Great Pyramids themselves, although they have sometimes been plundered, retain most of their silhouette. The Ptolemies, keen on honoring their status as pharaohs, do not wish to anger the priests or damage the reputation of an Egypt proud of its heritage. By the end of the High Ptolemaic period, the power of Rome is increasingly felt in the Mediterranean region, and the internal conflicts of the Lagid dynasty gradually weaken the Kingdom of Egypt. The last Ptolemies, such as Cleopatra VII, make great efforts to maintain their sovereignty, seeking Roman alliance while endeavoring to promote a distinct Greco-Egyptian identity. The Pyramids of Giza endure these events without notable renovation campaigns, serving rather as a prestigious backdrop for a few royal ceremonies, when the Ptolemaic dynasty eventually collapses in 30. Before Christ, following the defeat of Cleopatra and Mark Antony against Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, Egypt becomes a Roman province. Previous Greek testimonies then circulate throughout the Roman Empire in the form of accounts compiled and commented on by Latin scholars. The Egyptian names under their Hellenized appellations, namely Cheops, Chephren, and Mykerinos, appear in the writings studied by Roman scholars, fueling curiosity for these ancient monuments. The economic impact during these late periods and under Greek influence generally boils down to the measured exploitation of stone resources around Giza. The Eastern and Mediterranean markets offer considerable outlets for Egypt's agricultural and artisanal products, so the plateau, with its limestone quarries, plays only a complementary role. The Ptolemies, eager to profit from all local wealth, encouraged the extraction of blocks when it does not threaten the main religious structures and does not offend the sensitivities of populations attached to ancient sanctuaries. Some high-quality blocks can be transported using barges down the Nile to major urban centers. The use of these stones mainly concerns foundations or discrete parts of new buildings, as Tura limestone, located on the other bank of the Nile, is often preferred for prestigious cladding, being whiter and more homogeneous. Similarly, Aswan granite, considered essential for monumental temples, remains a flagship material. In this historical context, Giza is not completely abandoned, but it gradually transforms into a place where scholarly curiosity and limited economic opportunities intersect. Greek sources, starting with Herodotus, recount the ancient grandeur in a register that blends direct observation with fascination for age-old tales. Some travelers engrave their names or leave small votive offerings out of admiration or superstition. Local scribes, when commissioned, record the rare maintenance work or the minor uses of stone. Traditional funerary cults have not disappeared, but the Hellenistic administration pays them less attention than to the great contemporary temples dedicated to Serapis, Isis, or other rapidly expanding deities. Thus, the coexistence of pharaonic heritage and the arrival of Greek concepts produces a unique cultural assemblage, in which the pyramids retain their aura as monumental relics of the past, while occasionally facing the fate of makeshift quarries for practical needs, though on a much smaller scale than what will happen later, during the Roman era. Ultimately, the late periods in the Greek era leave Giza with the role of a revered historical monument, albeit partially exploited, offering visitors a glimpse of a prestigious past, while inserting itself into a changing present, subject to the diplomatic and military upheavals of the Eastern Mediterranean. The Roman and late antiquity period, approximately spanning from the 1st century before Christ to the 5th or 6th century Anno Domini, marks a phase of deep transformation in the history of the Giza site. Under Roman rule, and throughout the transition to the Eastern Empire and Byzantine influence, the pyramids and the Sphinx evoke mixed reactions of admiration, curiosity, and sometimes practical exploitation. Conquerors, officials, and merchants circulate in the Nile Valley, contemplating the legacy of the pharaohs and taking advantage of local resources. The ancient monuments, already several millennia old, become both symbols of past splendor and reservoirs of materials. During this era, interest in the pyramids is particularly illustrated in the writings of Pliny the Elder, a Roman scholar from the 1st century Anno Domini, who died in 79 during the eruption of Vesuvius. In his encyclopedic work, Natural History, he notes the extraordinary magnitude of the Giza edifices and provides figures regarding their size and the crowds needed for their construction. While he attempts to quantify their enormity, this author also entertains sometimes fanciful hypotheses about the lifting methods and the identity of the builders. Despite some inaccuracies, his account testifies to the Roman fascination with the engineering feats of ancient Egypt. The spectacular reputation of the pyramids prompts Roman visitors to classify them among the wonders of the world, although no official list is universally recognized. Literate travelers, garrisoned soldiers, or passing merchants are amazed by these colossal remains. Their curiosity is often expressed through graffiti engraving or through travel narratives. Local authorities, aware of the tourist attraction these monuments represent, partially supervise the necropolis surroundings and sometimes derive economic benefits. However, the exploitation of the structures themselves does not hesitate to erode and threaten their integrity. A notable form of exploitation unfolds in the recovery of limestone blocks intended for construction or lime manufacturing. The Romans, relying on demolition techniques simpler than those of the Pharaonic period, extract entire facings, especially in already weakened areas. The polished cladding stones, renowned for their quality, are reused in urban construction sites in Memphis, Alexandria, or less important towns. The road connecting Giza to the Delta and Cyrenaica can also transport these blocks, useful for consolidating roads, erecting military foundations, or feeding lime kilns. As Christianity slowly spreads in Egypt, then establishes itself more strongly after the Edict of Milan in 313, part of the population adopts new spiritual interpretations of these pagan monuments. Christian beliefs, while condemning the worship of idols, do not suddenly wipe away the historical curiosity and implicit veneration inspired by the pyramids. Wandering monks, Greek or Coptic pilgrims, and of course Byzantine administrators, observe the necropolis with a mix of wonder and mistrust at times. The doctrinal advancements of the Christian Church, also prompt the writing of legendary accounts, sometimes linking the pyramids to ancient biblical prophets. Despite this ambiguous interest, the site suffers from irregular maintenance. The Nile floods, sand winds, and natural erosion regularly weaken the surrounding structures. Occasional clearing operations are conducted to partially uncover the Sphinx or to free the surroundings of the Valley Temple of Khafre. These works, often funded by local authorities or wealthy patrons, are not systematically coordinated. The improvised digging, lacking preliminary studies, sometimes compromises the stability of fragile sections. Similarly, recurrent sand accumulation makes any lasting protection difficult, as the wind quickly carries new layers of dust and dunes. The sand covering the Sphinx does not prevent some visitors from approaching it to carve their names or leave a brief homage. In the corridors of the Great Pyramid, passage remains partially accessible in the curious attempt to venture into the inner chambers. However, these wanderings are not without risks, as lighting with torches or oil lamps remains rudimentary and can cause nausea or accidents. Layers of dust and debris sometimes block access, and the instability of certain sections prevents deep exploration. Despite these obstacles, the necropolis continues to be a cultural or spiritual milestone for those seeking to understand the ancient world. Archaeological testimonies from this time, although fragmentary, confirm the persistence of votive practices and rites of recognition, even if the identity of the deities or the meaning of the gestures evolves significantly. Within partially ruined chapels, crosses and Christian symbols are sometimes engraved near ancient hieroglyphic inscriptions. This superimposition reflects less a widespread conflict than a gradual reappropriation of a space imbued with the sacred. Ecclesiastical authorities limit worship towards the monuments themselves, but tolerate, to some extent, popular curiosity and occasional rituals. Christian funeral ceremonies, meanwhile, are most often organized in newer necropolises, more suited to the canons of the time. In the nearby city of Memphis, whose influence has been declining since the founding of Alexandria, local elites continue to benefit from materials originating from Giza. Future early Christian, civil, or military monuments sometimes exploit these ancient blocks, valued for their resistance and practicality. Indeed, it is easier to recover a pre-cut facing than to extract a raw stone from a new quarry. The successive reigns of Roman and then Byzantine governors moderately oversee these processes, especially when military necessities demand rapid fortifications. The pyramids, considered less sacred by some Christian administrators than by Roman polytheists, are thus more vulnerable to reuse. On the other hand, Roman culture, long imbued with Hellenism, inherits a taste for exoticism. Wealthy travelers, officials, or aristocrats touring the empire collect souvenirs and anecdotes. Giza becomes an almost obligatory stop when visiting Egypt, a land already mythologized by imperial Rome. Works of architecture and geography, inspired by Greek authors such as Strabo, seek to compare the monumentality of the pyramids with the spectacular architectures of Asia Minor or the amphitheaters of the West. Some laypersons marvel at the technical imprint left by the Egyptian dynasties, while others embark on intense speculations about the religious motivations that could have led to such edifices. Despite this renewed interest, the decline of Roman power in the region inexorably affects the maintenance of the site. Invasions from other provinces, the reorganization of military forces, and the gradual fall of the Western Empire leave Egypt under the more diffuse authority of the Eastern Empire, with Constantinople as its capital. This new political situation, coupled with economic difficulties, reduces the resources allocated to the preservation of monuments. The funerary temples annexed to the pyramids no longer find regular funding, and the management of archaeological sites relies more on private initiatives. Local lords may grant extraction rights or turn a blind eye to limited looting. Admiration nonetheless remains strong, as evidenced by the abundant production of amulets or cameos depicting a stylized pyramid profile. Despite the depredation, miniature sphinxes or statuettes reminiscent of Egyptian forms remain popular in the late Roman world and at the start of the Byzantine era. Artisans sometimes copy pharaonic motifs to create luxury items intended for the empire's elites. The Sphinx itself, partially buried, continues to haunt the collective imagination. Its role as a symbolic guardian, reinterpreted in the light of Christian theology, becomes the subject of exegesis, associating it either with a mysterious pagan power or with a symbol of vain pride. Despite the increasing sand coverage, groups of travelers persist in exploring the internal passages and documenting every corner. Some Christian pilgrims pray before the Sphinx, while others ponder its spiritual significance. The plateau, despite its ruins, remains a place of enchantment and enduring mystery. During the medieval Islamic period, which stretches in Egypt from the Arab-Muslim conquest in 641 Anno Domini to the arrival of the Ottomans in 1517, the Giza Plateau still captivates the attention of political elites, religious figures, and thinkers. The ancient monuments, already shrouded in many legends, continue to fuel narratives and speculations. Several renowned Arab authors, including al-Makrizi, born in 1364, and al-Idrisi, a 12th century geographer, endeavor to describe the site's topography and report local traditions, sometimes ancient, surrounded by beliefs related to hidden treasures or mysterious powers. The intellectual context, marked by cultural exchange and the translation of Greek or Aramaic works into Arabic, frequently nourishes astrological and esoteric interpretations. The chroniclers, mostly fascinated by the fabulous history associated with the pyramids, try to reflect on the true meaning of these monuments, questioning magic or more rational perspectives related to astronomy. At the time, the entire Giza pyramid complex, from the Great Pyramid attributed to Khufu to those of Khafre and Menkaure, embodies a pre-Islamic heritage whose vastness defies common understanding while inspiring wonder and inquiry into the purpose of these gigantic structures. Arab authors often provide a vivid and detailed testimony of the state of the pyramids they see or rediscover, each with their unique perspectives. Al-Makrizi, a famous historian and chronicler of Mamluk Cairo, writes an in-depth description of the monuments, noting block displacement, accumulated sand presence, and mentioning numerous rumors circulating in his time. He recounts, for example, various stories about sorcerer pharaohs who concealed gold, jewels, and marvelous objects within the pyramid's precincts, arousing the covetousness of Muslim rulers. The idea of pharaonic treasures hidden in the depths of Giza indeed incites all sorts of fantasies, reinforced by the real difficulty of exploring the internal corridors, particularly obscure at the time. Among the most well-known legends is the tradition of an expedition led by the Abbasid Caliph al-Ma'mun, who reigned from 813 to 833. Accounts suggest that he attempted to penetrate the Great Pyramid, convinced he would find incredible riches within. According to some chroniclers, al-Ma'mun's opening refers to the forcibly dug corridor parallel to the original entrance to reach the interior galleries. The versions vary regarding the success of this endeavor. Some claim that the caliph only found a few insignificant objects, while others mention vanished treasures. Regardless of the exaggerations or confusion surrounding this anecdote, it perfectly illustrates the allure of miraculous discoveries. Furthermore, Al-Idrisi, in his geography work, describes medieval Egypt by emphasizing the permanence of these colossal structures along the Nile, while also relaying beliefs about giant mechanisms or secret inscriptions, supposed to protect the sites and indicate the path to hidden goods. Beyond the treasure hunt, these sources offer interesting topographical details. We learn that the villages near the plateau then focused on supplying caravans and passing workers, while local notables sometimes demanded fees for visits or passage through the area. The Arab chroniclers, by recounting these practices, allow us to understand how life was organized around Giza, between scholarly curiosity, popular devotion, and very concrete economic activities. Many discussions also revolve around the identity of the ancient builders. Some authors, influenced by Jewish or Christian traditions, associate them with legends of giants or famous prophets, while others try to reconcile Quranic texts and ancient references to explain the genesis of such a project. The reuse of pyramid stones became, under certain medieval governments, a practical way to obtain building materials. It is known that the city of Cairo, officially founded in 969 by the Fatimid dynasty, rapidly developed over the centuries. Sumptuous mosques, large madrasas, Quranic schools, palaces, and city walls arose, demanding a significant quantity of limestone or granite blocks. The required supports, pavings, and thick walls required raw materials that could easily be extracted from ancient monuments. Some sultans authorized or even instigated these recoveries, having the outermost facings of the Great Pyramid removed to extract carefully cut stones. The polished finishes, still visible in the medieval period, offered ease of direct use in Cairo's religious buildings. Mamluk-era accounts confirm that hundreds of blocks were transported by carts or barges when the Nile's level permitted. Workers, supervised by foremen, carefully dismantled certain layers, occasionally causing partial collapses of ramps or access corridors. While these practices caused significant damage, notably to the fine facings of the pyramids, they testify to the perception of these monuments as a resource deposit of extraordinary potential. Chronicles from the time occasionally mention episodes where authorities, keen to nevertheless preserve the prestige of the pyramids, suddenly ceased these extractions and attempted to control illegal removals. In other accounts, the logistical difficulty of removing blocks situated at high altitudes on the edifice's upper flanks is mentioned, which were then abandoned, thus preserving certain sections. The very active Mamluk sultans in religious architecture exploited this vein of ancient stone, which is documented in the construction archives of many medieval mosques. Sometimes, inscriptions on reused blocks provide evidence of their pyramid origin, offering tangible proof of this controlled or, at times, illegal expropriation practice. These extractions, in addition to natural wear and potential earthquakes, locally weaken certain elements of the funerary complex of Khufu and his successors. However, despite this utilization-driven exploitation, the pyramids continue to exert such a symbolic influence that their complete destruction is never considered, even by the most unscrupulous leaders. The awareness of an ancestral heritage and the idea that these structures harbor secrets or divine protections helped limit massive destruction. Medieval sources even recount how these dismantling projects sometimes halt when teams believe they are cursed, or when a dramatic accident occurs during the recovery of a block. Although the recovery of stones continues episodically, the general maintenance of the site is rarely a priority for the Islamic authorities in place. The accumulation of sand, driven by prevailing winds, proves constant and requires regular manual clearances. Successive leaders, focused on their urban projects, generally abandon the idea of continuously clearing the sand from the Giza area. Thus, when chroniclers visit the Sphinx, many note that the colossal stone figure, the mythical guardian of the plateau, is often partially or almost totally buried. The blessings and popular rituals related to the Sphinx do not disappear, and it is reported that locals approach the monument, sometimes to lay small offerings or attribute protective virtues to this strange half-lion, half-human silhouette. From time to time, prominent figures of the Muslim world undertake to remove the sand to reveal the statue once again, motivated by curiosity, prestige, or the hope of discovering some treasure. These occasional digs remain limited, and the documents of the time mainly mention actions stemming from the personal will of a dignitary rather than a systematic or centralized program. The sand invariably ends up reclaiming its place, and the Sphinx thus remains in a constant cycle of partial burial. The rare engravings or drawings that reach us, created by Arab or Byzantine travelers, describe a rocky landscape dotted with immense flows of sand, making access to the base of the monument difficult, if not impossible. Despite this partial concealment, the symbolic importance of the Sphinx, inherited from a mysterious antiquity, continues to fascinate scholars, pilgrims, and ordinary onlookers in search of prodigious stories. During the medieval Islamic period, the thirst for understanding the world is nourished by a wide cultural melting pot. Greek, Persian, and Indian references, transmitted by the translation of scholarly works into Arabic, intermingle with a local heritage steeped in ancient Egyptian sagas. The pyramids then generate interpretations that go beyond the simple function of tombs. Many astrological theories emerge, linking the location of the plateau to special celestial configurations. Some authors imagine that the builders intended to align these monuments with particular constellations to capture or channel celestial influences. These esoteric theories often rely on approximate calculations of the angles, dimensions of the Great Pyramid, or its cardinal orientation. Treatises, sometimes attributed to Hermes Trismegistus or legendary philosophers, suggest an occult, even alchemical function on the smooth facade of the pyramid, supposedly designed to receive starlight and concentrate it in the royal chamber. Other authors develop connections between the pyramidal shape and the cosmic hierarchy, arguing that the point of the pyramid symbolizes the metaphysical connection between the world below and the celestial spheres. Some writings also present the idea that the lords of ancient Egypt mastered a superior science, inspired by antediluvian prophets. Islamic traditions, which honor many prophets common to the Abrahamic faiths, sometimes mix with these legends. It is thus said that the pyramids were built under the guidance of a biblical or Quranic figure, such as Enoch or even Noah, warned of the flood. This syncretic confusion, typical of an era when systematic archaeological exploration does not exist, bestows the pyramids with an almost universal, protective, and prophetic role. Conjectures about protective symbols, magical formulas inscribed in stone, or incantations sealed in secret chambers abound, and the scholars who propagate them often draw from treatises on alchemy and late Greek cosmology. In parallel, there is a flourishing of texts describing the pyramids as talismans protecting Egypt from natural disasters or invasions. Such writings are supported by the idea that no enemy could have destroyed these monuments, and that they contain essential knowledge for the survival of the kingdom. The local populations, upon hearing these stories, develop a respect that is sometimes fearful, sometimes admiring towards the monuments. It is an ambiguous feeling, where one fears violating a mysterious sanctuary while hoping to find fortune there. Pilgrims coming to pray in the mosques of Cairo often hear told that these structures date back to a time so ancient that it merges with the creation of the world, and that secrets scientifically inaccessible to ordinary men remain sealed within them. On an economic level, the Giza Plateau is not only a center for sourcing construction materials, but also a strategic passageway. The trade caravans that follow the Nile, or head toward Memphis and Old Cairo, can stop near the site, procuring water and provisions from the surrounding villages. Small workshops are created at the edge of the plateau to cut, recut, and polish the extracted blocks before sending them back to the urban center. Conveyance is organized, depending on the periods, by waterway or by road, and local scribes sometimes record the quantities of stone extracted, although few direct archives have reached us. Furthermore, certain individuals establish temporary storage areas where blocks intended for official or private constructions are piled up, leading to specific taxes. Informal guarding structures are set up. Groups of guards, commissioned by regional authorities or even by tribal chiefs, provide a form of security for the caravans, demanding in return tolls and various fees. Chroniclers report that these guardians are not always docile towards the central power, and disputes sometimes break out between the Sultan's officials and long-established guards on the routes leading to Giza. The site then becomes a space of multiple negotiations. The capital holders sought to finance the stone extraction must ensure the cooperation of the guards, while passing merchants pay a tribute to avoid pillages or roadblocks. This precarious balance is maintained thanks to the economic importance of the region, whose mineral resources, historical renown, and geographical location continue to draw a constant flow of people, ranging from scholarly explorers to simple carriers. In some places, sculptors' workshops take advantage of the soft limestone to craft architectural ornaments intended for palaces, mosques, and other buildings being constructed over time in Cairo. Travelers passing through the area sometimes mention hearing the sound of chisels and mallets resounding in open-air quarries, where experienced stonecutters work the rock extracted directly on site. The sultans and the Mamluks encourage this economy, as it allows them to quickly supply their urban construction sites without having to pay too much for the importation of distant materials. This economic organization, built around the reuse of ancient stone, represents an intelligent adaptation to the needs of the moment, while participating in a certain gradual erosion of the exterior claddings of the Great Pyramid and its neighbors. As this exploitation spans over time, a more discreet usage emerges: the rental of exclusive access zones. Owners or administrators, sometimes from the religious body or the local nobility, set up barriers or surveillance cords to control who enters the plateau in order to extract limestone. The taxes collected become an additional source of income, indeed attracting envy. There are documented cases of skirmishes between different clans aiming to monopolize the extraction over a portion of the plateau. Some Islamic legislative treaties even discuss the legitimacy of these tolls and their compatibility with Sharia, proving that the debate over the exploitation of such an archaeological site is old and complex. The inhabitants of the neighboring villages, although often living in poverty, partly benefit from this activity. The men can be hired as day laborers for transporting blocks, while the women prepare food for the stonecutters and haulers. The caravanners, on their side, sometimes rent camels or donkeys to move the stones, and a small tool repair economy also develops, where itinerant blacksmiths offer their services. Improvised markets set up for a few days near the plateau, taking advantage of the influx of buyers and sellers. The value of Giza stone remains variable depending on demand. During certain periods, when major royal projects slow down, extraction decreases and the workshops temporarily close. But as soon as Cairo experiences a new campaign of mosque refurbishments or major civil works, Giza becomes bustling with activity again. Furthermore, as the reputation of the pyramids attracts curious travelers and pilgrims, a rudimentary form of local tourism establishes itself, with inhabitants offering to guide foreigners through the corridors or take them to the Sphinx if it is partially unsanded. Access taxes may be required, as well as tips to climb the pyramid or reach the highest points. Although the activity appears to be isolated initiatives rather than a well-organized setup, it already contributes to defining an emblematic site where timeless legends and concrete economic issues meet. The successive Islamic dynasties, while reshaping the region, thus find in the pharaonic monuments not only raw material, but also a pretext for exercising power by establishing passage rights and ostentatious displays. Without conducting archaeological excavations in the modern sense, they observe, modify, and use the plateau in a balance between resource extraction and the almost sacred fascination inspired by the prodigious antiquity of these pyramids. The Ottoman period, which spans Egypt from the early 16th century to the end of the 18th century, sees an influx of European travelers attracted by the renowned pyramids of Giza and their secular mysteries. During these decades, explorers, pilgrims, and diplomats passed through Cairo, a capital then part of a vast empire governed by Ottoman governors. In the eyes of these foreign witnesses, the city presents an exotic atmosphere, a major commercial crossroads where caravans and ships converge. Numerous accounts, often published in the form of travel journals or correspondence, describe with fascination the imposing silhouette of the pharaonic monuments, contrasting with the Ottoman minarets. The first drawings, engravings, and descriptions multiply, sometimes embellished with fanciful anecdotes. Between the 16th and 18th centuries, graphic representations of the pyramids remain often imprecise, as the artists rely on both oral testimonies of their hosts and hasty observations, sometimes made from a distant viewpoint. The engravers, armed with rudimentary techniques, try to recreate the extraordinary atmosphere felt in front of the monumental blocks, while proposing curious interpretations of the proportions. Some travelers, unfamiliar with the actual scale, describe the faces as defaced by erosion or exaggerate the inclination of the levels. Over time, sketchbooks circulate among scholars, sparking the enthusiasm of intriguing scientific personalities who wish to verify these observations on site. This marks the beginning of a slow shift towards a more methodical approach. Beyond engraved representations, several visitors undertake specific itineraries to approach the pyramids more closely. They often negotiate the rental of mounts or boats to sail the Nile from Cairo and reach the Giza Plateau. Pilgrims seeking miracles sometimes describe alleged manuscripts hidden under the stones, while diplomats, entrusted with official missions, mention the scale of the substructures and the splendid view from the top. Blending religious fascination and geographical curiosity, these itineraries illustrate the ambivalence of a varied audience, oscillating between devotion and the desire to measure the unknown. The account of each journey is nuanced by encounters with the inhabitants, negotiations for lodging, and amazement at the free and monumental desert horizon. The fascination with the dimensions of the pyramids quickly fuels a competitive spirit. Who will be the first to provide a reliable estimate of their height or base? In an intellectual climate where the marvelous intertwines with scholarly ambitions, some try their hand at extravagance. They construct makeshift stairways made of rudimentary planks, or climb the sides, gripping the ledges to attempt to evaluate the height. The varied estimates are sometimes based on an imprecise count of rows of blocks, or simply on a visual assessment. Such attempts, recounted in scattered writings, testify to the desire to unravel the secrets of the ancients, despite the lack of standardized methods. All seek to understand what lies behind these titanic volumes. Alongside these amateur ascents, various travelers observe the condition of the Sphinx, whose monumental silhouette intrigues as much as it inspires myths. During the Ottoman period, some local notables sporadically undertake to clear the colossus of sand, whether to satisfy their own curiosity or to impress visiting dignitaries. However, frequent storms quickly cover the statue again, especially when the desilting efforts lack scope and follow-up. Over the years, snippets of reports suggest that the enigmatic face of the Sphinx, severely eroded, seems to jealously guard an ancient secret. These partial clearings, in turn, fuel European speculations. Could there be galleries or underground chambers hidden beneath the gigantic sculpture? Hypotheses abound in scholarly travelers' circles. The gradual arrival of more precise measuring instruments marks a new phase in the understanding of the monuments. At the turn of the 17th century, enlightened travelers begin to equip themselves with compasses to map out the orientation of the faces, as well as survey chains to quantify the exact length of each side. These early attempts at triangulation often rely on a rudimentary system of angle measurement. Observers position themselves at different reference points around the pyramid and roughly calculate distances using simple geometric formulas. The figures obtained vary from one observer to another, illustrating the difficulty of reaching a reliable consensus. Yet these attempts inaugurate the crucial shift from mere admiration to a methodical perspective in search of rational explanations. Some authors, concerned with precision, record their results in detailed reports, accompanied by rough sketches illustrating the methods employed. Thus emerges a geographical literature that transcends simple picturesque travelogues. Cultivated personalities of the time, such as cartographers or diplomats on extended missions, seek to compare the proportions described in antiquity with those they observe on site. By cross-referencing snippets of Greek or Latin texts with their own notes, they attempt to reconcile the scholarly tradition with field investigation. Gradually, the idea emerges that it is possible to understand the internal structure of the pyramids by coupling direct observation with the nascent science of practical geometry. This lays the foundation for a more systematic approach. During this period, several routes intersect, giving rise to a true network of information. Accounts from Italian merchants, German scholars, or French gentlemen begin to circulate within Europe's intellectual salons, fueling lively discussions on the precise nature of the monuments and the possibilities of their construction. While some continue to believe in esoteric hypotheses, others already favor a more rationalist explanation, imagining a vast workforce overseen by a centralized power. The confrontation of viewpoints encourages a sort of pre-Egyptology, well before the official recognition of this discipline. The testimonies concur on the immensity of the blocks, the splendor of the site at sunset, and the complexity of the labor required. Over the decades, travel itineraries become codified. Informal guides emerge around Cairo to offer their services to foreigners wishing to climb the Great Pyramid or approach the Sphinx. These guides, often from local communities, develop their own narratives to impress the curious mixing family legends and practical information. Pilgrims thus have stories told to them about prophecies hidden in the inner chambers, while scholars are more likely to seek out the already inscribed Arabic or Latin engravings on the stone. Some nobles, driven by a desire for prestige, return to Europe with sketches and fragments of rock, which they exhibit as exotic trophies. Gradually, the visit to Giza becomes part of a sought-after cultural journey, alongside other wonders of the world. Attempts at measurement gain in precision when some travelers, inspired by emerging technological progress, equip themselves with more elaborate devices to determine exact altitude or orientation. We see the appearance of the first surveys conducted using rudimentary astrolabes or sextants imported from maritime Europe. These instruments, long used in navigation, now allow celestial angles to be recorded in order to refine knowledge of potential alignments with certain stars or cardinal points. The results remain heterogeneous, influenced by the variable quality of the tools and the experience of the users. Nonetheless, the idea that the pyramid could be aligned with remarkable precision relative to true north fuels the curiosity of scientific circles. Thus one no longer simply marvels. One interrogates the underlying geometric principles. Gradually, a change of mindset takes hold. The first calculations disseminated in scientific circles provoke as much debate as enthusiasm. People wonder how, several millennia earlier, builders could have acquired such precision in orientation and orchestrated such a construction site in the middle of the desert. Some theorize the existence of sophisticated instruments among the ancients, while others prefer to invoke the traditional method of solar observation. European curiosity no longer confines itself to a wondrous gaze. It now projects onto these remnants the perspective of an unknown genius, stimulating methodical inquiry and curiosity. Between 1798 and 1801, the Egyptian campaign led by Napoleon Bonaparte was not limited to a military operation. It was also accompanied by an ambitious scientific expedition, orchestrated by the Commission of Sciences and Arts. This team included more than 100 scholars, engineers, artists, and technicians. Their objective was to systematically study the geography, natural resources, monuments, and relics of the Nile Valley. For the first time, ancient Egypt became the subject of a large-scale systematic investigation, laying the foundations of Egyptology. When Admiral Nelson's fleet destroyed the French ships at Aboukir in August 1798, the Army of the Orient found itself isolated. Nevertheless, the scholars, settled in Cairo and other locations along the Nile, tirelessly continued their work. They were as interested in topography and hydrology as they were in ancient monuments. Mathematicians and engineers took measurements of latitude, altitude, and created cartographic surveys. The artists, on their part, would soon sketch plates detailing pharaonic architecture. Despite logistical and political difficulties, these analyses represented a decisive milestone towards a deep understanding of Egypt's past. Among these researchers were personalities such as the mathematician Gaspard Monge, the chemist Claude-Louis Berthollet, and the engineer Nicolas-Jacques Conté, inventor of the graphite pencil. Others, less known, contributed with their mineralogical, zoological, or botanical observations. The scientists studied the local fauna, notably the iconic crocodiles and ibises that had fascinated the Greeks of antiquity. They also collected data on flora to understand contemporary Egyptian agriculture, heir to a long tradition. This general mobilization of skills served to create a meticulous inventory of the territory. In the fields of architecture and archaeology, Dominique Vivant-Denon particularly distinguished himself. An artist, traveler, and future director of the Louvre under Napoleon, he traveled the Nile Valley, drawing temples, pylons, and monumental sculptures. His sketches and observations provided crucial material for the future description of Egypt. This monumental work, published in several volumes starting in 1809, resulted from a unique collective effort. Not only did it compile architectural surveys, but it also presented historical, geographical, and natural studies of the region. The monumental plates, carefully engraved, were a decisive asset for the dissemination of knowledge. Thanks to them, Europe was able to discover the scope and sophistication of Egyptian sites, including the Pyramids of Giza, already at the heart of many myths. The plates showed sections, elevations, and ornamental details. They revealed the precision of the joints, the monumentality of the columns, and the regularity of the proportions. For the first time, an educated public outside a circle of specialists gained access to rigorous representations of these ancient structures. The process of systematization quickly took shape. Members of the Commission of Sciences and Arts, aided by soldiers often assigned logistical support missions, produced their first catalogs of the monuments of Giza and other sites. These catalogs grouped precise dimensions, conservation status, and sometimes visible inscriptions. Besides their scientific value, these inventories also catered to the curiosity of Napoleonic France, eager for cultural glory. Publishing such studies contributed to the prestige of a nation seeking to present itself as a patron of the arts and letters. The circulation of this knowledge proved crucial for the rise of Egyptology. As surveys, maps, and plates circulated in European academies, scientific debates were sparked in salons and learned circles. The printing press facilitated the reproduction of these discoveries, and the description of Egypt gained notoriety. Navigation companies and wealthy travelers began to take an interest in itineraries along the Nile, sensing a new field of exploration. Giza, with its majestic pyramids, quickly became a reference point for those seeking to understand universal history. When the military campaign ended in 1801, many of these collections and documents were seized by the British following French capitulations. Among the most famous trophies was the Rosetta Stone, now housed in the British Museum. However, the majority of notes, engravings, and preparatory studies had already made their way to France or remained in the hands of scholars. This allowed the publication effort to continue. Thus, even if the military venture ended in strategic failure, the scientific exploration left a considerable legacy for future generations. In the first half of the 19th century, as the fascination with the Orient spread, a budding sense of heritage awareness began to emerge in Egypt. The local authorities, successively under Ottoman influence and under the ambitious rule of Muhammad Ali, gradually became aware of the importance of controlling access to antiquities. The idea of creating an antiquities service took hold, although concrete means were still limited. Many ancient objects nevertheless went abroad, feeding private and public collections in Europe. Plundering and treasure hunting were widespread phenomena encouraged by merchants. In this context, the first officials, sometimes supported by passionate Europeans, attempted to limit the wild extractions of stones and the illicit sale of figurines, bas-reliefs, or papyrus. The administration, however, remained embryonic, and bribes allowed some travelers to leave the country with loads of rare objects. Despite this lack of control, the desire to preserve these treasures gradually became a matter of state, foreshadowing the establishment of a true protection system. The future directors of the Antiquities Service, such as Auguste Mariette, would inherit this emerging framework. In parallel, a budding tourism started to emerge. Western travelers, often wealthy and fond of exoticism, set out to discover the wonders of Egypt. Caravans were organized from Alexandria or Cairo, offering excursions to the Pyramids of Giza. Local guides, sometimes self-proclaimed, sold their services to accompany foreigners on the plateau. Travel accounts multiplied, fueling the collective imagination and reinforcing the idea that a stay in Egypt was an unforgettable journey. Such trips already attracted criticism about the preservation of monuments, as some curious visitors sought souvenirs to take away. The trade of antiquities, for its part, became a lucrative activity. Statuettes, amulets, and small artifacts found buyers in improvised markets near the sites. Some traders did not hesitate to initiate clandestine excavations, hoping to get their hands on rare pieces to sell at high prices in Europe. Local leaders tried to curb this, but controlling the territory proved difficult. The regular passage of merchant ships offered opportunities to export these goods, often without any authorization. The initial laws aiming to regulate this trade remained largely ineffective. Over time, the abuses witnessed by some travelers or diplomats eventually alerted public opinion. Accounts reported damaged monuments, tomb rooms ransacked without care, or frescoes slashed to extract fragments. The calls for better protection became more pressing, especially among European scholars who had studied the relics and understood their infinite historical value. Giza, in particular, saw its plateau regularly visited, and local families profited from these visits by offering transport on donkeys or camels, sometimes in exchange for high fees. In this context of tourism growth, some caravans also housed true collectors who brought back authentic objects to Europe, though sometimes stolen or removed from their archaeological context. Western museums thus enriched themselves with pieces of obscure origin, which would complicate later research. The first guides written by enthusiasts, as well as travel accounts, began to circulate, describing precise itineraries to reach the pyramids. The accounts of these 19th century explorers highlighted the magnificence of the structures and recounted the admiration provoked by the Great Pyramid, already considered the most majestic tomb in the world. These testimonies scandalized some consciences. At the beginning of the 19th century, Europe, still dazzled by Napoleon's expedition to Egypt, starting in 1798, grew animated with a keen interest in the treasures of the Nile Valley. The accounts of the French scholars, compiled in the famous Description de l'Egypte, prompted many explorers, engineers, or antiquarians to travel to the Giza Plateau, hoping to unravel the secrets of its immense pyramids. While some saw the technical prowess of a vanished civilization, others perceived a field for experimentation to test sometimes fanciful theories. The 19th century thus emerged as an era of frantic exploration, marked by major discoveries, controversies, and methodological advances that would foreshadow the emergence of modern Egyptology. During the 1830s, British Colonel Howard Vyse emerged as one of the first significant figures of this new rush to Giza. His approach, though ambitious, seems questionable today. By using explosives, he sought to force access to unexplored corners of the Great Pyramid of Khufu. In doing so, he managed to uncover relieving chambers above the king's chamber, where inscriptions attributed to Khufu's teams could be seen painted, mentioning the pharaoh's name in the form of cartouches. Vyse's enthusiasm for the discovery fueled widespread media attention. It was viewed as confirmation of the traditional attribution of the monument to Khufu, supported by Herodotus and earlier documents. However, his robust techniques drew scathing criticism, both for damaging the structure and risking the destruction of valuable clues. Nevertheless, the publication of his findings encouraged other enthusiasts to continue exploring Giza, convinced that there were still secret rooms or hidden passages to be discovered. Another key figure, Flinders Petrie, soon revolutionized practices by introducing precision and scientific rigor as guiding principles. A British archaeologist and engineer, he conducted his first excavation campaigns at Giza in the last decades of the 19th century. Where previous explorers focused mainly on spectacular findings, Petrie armed himself with sophisticated surveying instruments to measure the base of the Great Pyramid, assess the straightness of its edges, and evaluate the orientation of its faces. His attention to detail resulted in remarkably reliable statistics. For example, he proved that the sides of the pyramid differ by less than a few centimeters from each other, a sign of astonishing accuracy for a construction site approximately 4,500 years old. Petrie also highlighted the importance of the royal cubit, an ancient Egyptian unit of measurement, by showing how it governed every dimension. His innovative methods, coupled with meticulous recording of discoveries, foreshadow modern archaeology. From now on, excavation goes beyond treasure hunting. Observations are compiled, compared, and testable hypotheses are formulated. Before Petrie, another eminent pioneer, Carl Richard Lepsius, also made a decisive impact on the study of Giza. As early as the 1840s, this Prussian Egyptologist and his team traveled the Nile Valley to compile an exhaustive catalog of monuments. The results of his missions were published in an impressive work titled Denkmäler aus Ägypten und Äthiopien, which recorded pyramids, temples, stelae, and mastabas, offering new insights into the geographical distribution and chronological evolution of these structures. At Giza, Lepsius set out to classify the tombs of dignitaries by identifying their architectural and stylistic features, laying the foundations for more precise dating of many mastabas. He also aimed to document the hieroglyphic inscriptions adorning some walls, allowing the records to circulate in European scholarly circles. His engravings and surveys, remarkably accurate for their time, generated great interest in Europe and fueled research on the dynastic history and social organization of ancient Egypt. Although his excavations were less invasive than those of Weiss, Lepsius did not hesitate to remove objects and ship certain artifacts to Prussian museums, intending to preserve them by the standards of the time. Nonetheless, his work represented a crucial milestone in the understanding of Giza, as it combined excavation, documentation, and systematic classification of monuments. In the same spirit, two Frenchmen, Auguste Mariette and Gaston Maspero, contributed to laying the groundwork for a policy of preserving Egyptian antiquities. Mariette, appointed curator of monuments, founded the Antiquities Service and worked to combat the long-standing looting of archaeological sites. He established rules for organizing excavations and sought to protect monuments, including the pyramids, from the covetousness of private collectors. Wealthy travelers, fascinated by the prospect of bringing back a piece of history, could no longer freely take what they found in the sand. Gaston Maspero, who succeeded Mariette, continued these efforts by strengthening the enforcement of laws and overseeing the management of discoveries. Procedures for restitution or sharing emerged, with unearthed objects distributed between the Egyptian government and official missions, while counterfeiters or illegal excavators faced penalties. These measures organized the preservation of Giza's treasures while allowing regulated access for scientific teams whose research contributed to shedding light on pharaonic history. Within this ferment, Charles Piazzi Smith, the Astronomer Royal for Scotland, offers a singular perspective on the Great Pyramid. In the latter half of the 19th century, he developed a theory known as pyramidology, positing that the dimensions of Khufu encase a sacred code foretelling prophecies. According to him, the sacred inch derived from a divinely originating measure, reflected in every proportion of the edifice. His writings, intertwining approximate calculations with religious speculations, achieved certain success among an audience eager for mysteries and biblical revelations. However, quickly, Flinders Petrie, relying on his own surveys, refuted these extrapolations by demonstrating that rational explanations sufficed to comprehend the pyramid's exceptional symmetry. The enthusiasm for pyramidology, while it stirred passions in the newspapers and salons, did not withstand confrontation with the facts established by the scientific method. Yet, this controversy aptly illustrates the heightened curiosity of the 19th century, where the discovery of ancient civilizations crystallized both popular imagination and the growth of emerging scholarship. Photography, booming at this time, enriches archives and awareness around Giza. Photographers accompany expeditions or travel independently to the site, equipped with heavy equipment and glass plates. Their photographs, often delicate to capture given the intense light and sandstorms, immortalize the state of the monuments, ongoing excavations, and the people involved. These images then circulate in Europe, reproduced in albums or sometimes projected at conferences. They evoke genuine amazement. Compared to drawings, photography provides an additional level of objectivity, allowing documentation of transformations, for instance, when teams clear filled-in accesses or remove piles of debris. Meanwhile, artists and engravers continue to produce graphic plates to illustrate reliefs, cartouches, or hieroglyphs. The juxtaposition of photographic recording and scientific drawing marks a turning point. Henceforth, visual representation becomes a tool for comparison, analysis, and dissemination, supplementing narratives and topographical surveys. Despite these advances, the Sphinx remains partially buried under successive layers of sand, regularly obstructing its paws and flank. Throughout the 19th century, occasional clearing initiatives emerged, financed by a wealthy patron or orchestrated by a scientific mission. Each clearing offers the chance to discover new cracks, check the rock base's condition, and observe wear caused by wind erosion. The weakened blocks sometimes receive makeshift mortar consolidations without any real prior stratigraphic study. These operations are rarely coordinated in the long term. Barely is the sand removed when it eventually accumulates again, driven by prevailing winds. Photographs of these occasional projects, however, spark curiosity in Europe and fuel the desire for more in-depth excavations. Explorers then mention the need for permanent intervention to preserve the monument by incorporating more sophisticated support techniques. However, this idea confronts financial constraints and the absence of a genuine state structure capable of taking on such a large-scale project. Gradually, there arises a demand for more methodical studies, not limited to the hunt for hidden chambers. Conscientious researchers begin to maintain detailed excavation journals, record stratigraphy, and note the exact position of each artifact. They implement topographical surveys to document the layout of mastabas, temples, and causeways. The goal is to place each discovery within its context, observing the succession of sediment layers or displaced blocks. This approach marks the emergence of systematic field archaeology, demanding method and meticulousness. Efforts are made to understand the site's history step by step, integrating each structure, each inscription, into a comprehensive vision. The plans obtained by the end of the century, more precise than ever, now serve as references for future generations. They clearly identify the spatial hierarchy between the royal pyramid and the pharaoh's entourage's tombs, pinpoint successive renovations or ancient repairs, and begin to distinguish the complex stratification that traces, through dust, the very evolution of the Giza plateau. In parallel, the first comparative analyses of the exhumed objects are multiplying: pottery, copper tools, fragments of bas-reliefs, or statue remains. Scientists are trying to establish a reliable chronology of the Old Kingdom by comparing ceramic typologies and the paleography of hieroglyphs. They also note the variety of stones used, whether it be local limestone or granite transported from Aswan, already outlining the exchange circuit of precious materials within the kingdom. This search for chronological and spatial coherence corresponds to a new desire to go beyond mere wonder to reach a reasoned understanding of Egyptian civilization. The fieldwork, still embryonic at the end of the 19th century, would nevertheless lay the groundwork for a method that, in the following century, would become the norm in the archaeological study of Giza.